Codex Bookbit said. Silrena is now Megalian said. Queen 90 lurk.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Book Club Part 3. Honestly, didn't think I'd get this far, if I'm being honest, in this kind of things. Um, but yeah, been a long week. And mine kind of started with all things go. Well, every 2 weeks or so, give or take. Turn up. It's a little brighter than expected. Anyways, back on track. Uh, this week I started. My week started with the D&D session where everyone is captured. Um, all of our stuff's gone. I lost my arm because it was hex tech related and they somehow took it off. Sure. Why, or did they think it was funny to take it off? I don't know. But in any case, we somehow managed to break out ish, I guess. I guess. Still a work in progress. We still gotta find the exits because the pit we're in technically doesn't have an exit, and we have a time limit because otherwise the rest of the town that we were previously is going to be underwater. It's a very interesting set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. But yeah, I due to how this week kind of went in terms of work and everything, I kind of forgot about to give y'all some homework. So yeah, I also didn't really plan for questions either because I realized that as soon as I got home, like I don't have questions for y'all. I didn't post this today. Whoops. But yeah. Let's see. In terms of everything else going on, I think that pretty much about it. I will say that I did some. Okay, I really need to get to that live update sooner rather than later. I do have. I do have some sound alerts. I have some. I messed around with the sound alert stuff, so we have those now as point redeems, and some as bits. Might switch them out or make them all point redeems for now until I get some more stuff on the ball going. But for now, that's what we got. Let me drink a little water real quick. And then tomorrow we got another kit that's been on my backlog for a while. And that is the Kamiki Burning Gundam. So, not sure what I'm going to do with that just yet. I might do a thing where... Actually, no, because technically it doesn't appear until the second Build Fighter series, so... Maybe? I don't know. Nah, I'll figure it out. I'll think of something tomorrow, but I'm not worried about it too much in terms of that, but... So, yeah. I think it's safe to say we can probably get started now. Push that to the side here, and then as close as I can, and as I said previously, this next chapter involves spiders. So if you are an arachnophobe, you have been warned. And yeah, warned. So let's get started. Hopefully I don't lose my voice halfway through today. Pull up a little bit closer. There we go. I realize I'm talking a bit more quietly when I read. And in some cases, other than projecting my voice as much as I should be. So we'll see how this goes. Chapter 8. Flies and Spiders. See? Told you. They walked in a single file line. The entrance to the path was like a short sort of an arch leading into a gloomy tunnel made by two great trees that leant together. Too old and strangled with ivy and hung with lichen to bear much more than a few blackened leaves. The path itself was narrow and wound in and out among the trunks. Soon the light at the gate was like a bright hole far behind, and the quiet was so deep that their feet seemed to thump along with all the trees, leaned over and listened. As their eyes became used to the dimness, they could see a little way to either side, in a sort of dark and green glimmer. Occasionally, a slender beam of sun had the luck to slip in, and some... Take your time to read, take your time to read. This isn't a contest. Always gotta remind myself this. And through some opening in the leaves far above. And still, more luck in not being caught in the tangled boughs and matted twigs beneath, stabbed down thin and bright before them. But this was seldom, and it was soon ceased altogether. There were black squirrels in the woods, as Bilbo Sharp's inquisitive eyes got used to seeing things. You could catch glimpses of them whisking off to the path and scuttling behind tree trunks. There were queer noises too, grunts and scufflings and hurryings into the undergrowth, and among the leaves that lay piled endlessly thick in places on the forest floor. But what made the noises he could not see. The nastiest things they saw were the cobwebs, dark, dense cobwebs, as with threads extraordinarily thick, often stretched from tree to tree, or tangled in the lower branches on either side of them. There were none stretched across the path, but whether because of some magic kept it clear, or for another reason they could not guess. It was not long before they grew to hate the forest as heartily as they thought it, as heartily as they hated the tunnels of the goblins, and it seemed to offer even less hope of any ending. But they had to go on, long after they were sick for a sight of the sun and of the sky, and long for the feel of the wind on their faces. There was no movement of air under the forest roof, and it was everlastingly still and dark and stuffy. Even the dwarfs felt it, who were used to tunneling, and lived at times for long whiles without the light of the sun. But the hobbit, who liked the holes to make a house in, not spend in summer days in, felt as he was being slowly suffocated. The nights were the worst. It then became pitch dark. Not what you call pitch dark, but really pitch. So black that you could see nothing. Bilbo tried flapping his hand in front of his nose, but he could not see it well. Well, perhaps it is not true to say that they could see nothing. They could see eyes. They slept all closely huddled together and took in turns to watch. Safe bet. And then when it was Bilbo's turn, he would see gleams in the darkness around them, and sometimes pairs of yellow or red or green eyes stare at him from a little distance, and then slowly fade and disappear, and then slowly shine out again in another place. And sometimes they would gleam down from the branches just above him, and that was most terrifying. But the eyes that he liked the least were the horrible, pale, bulbless sort of eyes. Insect eyes, he thought, not animal eyes, only they are much too big. Although it was not yet very cold, and they tried lighting watchfires at night. But soon they gave up. It seemed to bring hundreds and hundreds of eyes all around them, though the creatures, whatever they were careful never to let their bodies show in the little flicker of the flames. Worse still, it brought thousands of dark gray and black moths, some nearly as big as your hands, flapping and whirling around your ears. They could not stand for that, nor the huge bats, black as a top hat either, so they gave up. On fires, and sat at night and dozed in enormous, uncanny darkness. All this went on for what seemed to the hobbit ages and upon ages. And he was always hungry, for they were extremely careful with their provisions. Even so, as days followed, all day, and still the forest seemed just the same, they began to get anxious. The food would not last forever. It was in fact already beginning to get low. They tried shooting at the squirrels and wasted many arrows before they managed to bring one to the path. When they roasted it, it proved horrible to taste, and they shot no more squirrels. They were thirsty too, for they had none too much water, and in all the time they had seen neither a spring nor stream. This was their state, when one day they found on their path blocked by running water. It flowed fast and strong, but not very wide right across the way, and it was black, and it looked in the gloom. It looked it in the gloom. It was well that Bjorn had warned them against it, or they wouldn't have drank from it, whether its color and filled with their empty skins, whatever its color and filled some of their empty skins as at its bank, as it was they only thought. That is a weird way of, it's a weird punctuation. As it was, oh, there, yeah, okay, now I'm reading it correctly. My eyes are adjusting. As it was, they only thought of how to cross it without wetting themselves in its water. There had been a bridge of the wood across, but it had been rotted and fallen, leaving only broken posts near the bank. Bilbo, kneeling on the brink and peering forward, cried, "There is a boat far across the far bank! Now, why couldn't they have been on this side?" "How far away do you think it is?" asked Thorin, for by now they knew Bilbo had the sharpest eyes among them. "Not far at all. I shouldn't have to take about Think about 12 yards. 12 yards. I should have thought it was 30 at least, but my eyes didn't see as well as they used to 100 years ago. Still, 12 yards. It's as good as a mile. We can't jump it, and we dare not try to wade or swim. Can any of you throw a rope? Well, what's the good of that? The boat is sure to be tied up, even if you could hook it, which I doubt. I don't believe it's tied, said Bilbo, though, of course, I can't be sure in this light. But it looks to me as if it were just drawn up on the bank, which is low, just where the path goes down to the water. Dory is the strongest, but Philly is the youngest. He has the best sight. Come here, Philly, and see if you can see the boat Mr. Baggins is talking about. Philly thought he could. So when he stared a long while to get an idea of the direction, the others brought him a rope. They had several with them. On the end of the longest, they fastened one of the large iron hooks they had used for catching their packs. Catching their packs to the straps about their shoulders. Billy took this in his hand, balanced it for a moment, and then flung it across the stream. Splash! It went into the water. Not far enough, said Bilbo, who was peering forward. A couple of feet and you would have dropped it into the boat. Try again. I don't suppose the magic is strong enough to hurt you. If you touch a bit of rope. Billy picked up the hook when he had drawn it back, rather doubtfully all the same. This time he threw it with the greatest strength. Steady, said Bilbo. You've thrown it to the right into the wood. On the other side now. Draw it back gently. Billy hauled the rope back slowly, and after a while Bilbo said, carefully, it's lying on the boat. Let's hope the hook will catch it. It did. The rope went taut, and Philly pulled in vain. Thank you for telling me that. Windows system. I really wish that was not involved. Anything? Oh wait, no, I could probably move. Oh, this sucks. That'd work. I'll do that later. Where am I? Everyone taut, and Philly pulled in vain. Keely came to his help, and then Orin and Glowing. They tugged, and suddenly they all fell over on their backs. Bilbo was on the lookout, however, caught the rope with a piece of stick and fending it off the little back boat as it came rushing towards the stream. Help, he shouted, and Balin was just in time to seize the boat before it floated off down the current. It was tied after all, said he, looking at the snap painter that was still dangling from it. That was a good pull, my lads, and a good job that our rope was stronger. Who will come first? Asked Bilbo. I shall, said Thorin. And you will come with me, and Philly and Balin. That's as many as the boat will hold at this time. After that, Keely and Orin, and Gloin and Dory, next Ori and Nori, Buford and Bulford, and last Dwalin and Bumper. I'm always last, and I don't like it, said Bumper. It's somebody else's turn today. You should not be so fat as you are. You must be with the last and lightest boatload. Don't start grumbling against orders, or something bad will happen to you. There aren't any oars. How are you going to push it back across the far bank? Give me another length of rope, or another hook, said Philly. And when they got it ready, he cast it into the darkness as high as he could throw it. But since it did not fall down again, and they saw that it must have struck in the branches. Get in now, said Philly, and one of you haul on the rope that's stuck in the tree to the other side. One of the others must keep hold of the hook use it first. When we are safe on the other side, we can hook him onto it, and we can draw the boat back. In this way, they were all soon on the far bank across the enchanted stream. Orlin had just scrambled out of the coiled rope on his arm, and Bumper, still grumbling, was ready to follow. When something bad did happen, there was a flying sound of hooves on the path ahead. Out of the gloom suddenly came the shape of a flying deer. It charged into the dwarves and bowled them over and gathered itself into a leap. High it sprang and cleared the water with a mighty jump. But it did not reach the other side and safety. Thorn was the only one who had kept his feet and his wits. As soon as they had landed, he bent his bow and fitted his arrow in case of any hidden guardian of the boat appeared. Now he sent a swift and sure shot into the leaping beast. As it reached the further bank, it stumbled. The shadows swallowed it up, but they heard the sound of hooves quickly falter and then go still. But they could not shout in praise of the shot, however. A dreadful wail from Bilbo put all thoughts of Vision out of their minds. But Bumber has fallen in. Bumber is drowning, he said. It was only too true. Bumber had the only one foot on land when that heart bore down on him, and it sprang over him. He stumbled and thrusted the boat away from the bank, and then toppled back into the dark water, his hands slipping off the slimy roots at the edge, while the boat span slowly off and disappeared. They could still see his hood above the water when they ran to the bank. Quickly, they flung a rope with a hook towards him. His hands caught it, and they pulled him to the shore. He was trenched from hair to boots, of course, but that was not the worst. When they laid him on his back, he was already fast asleep, with one hand cut in the rope so tight that they could not get it away from his grasp. Fast asleep he remained, in spite of all of they could do. So the river is cursed to make you sleep. So you fall in. Okay, that's it. Alright, alright. I'm just still standing over him, cursing their ill luck and Bumber's clumsiness, and lamenting the loss of the boat, which had made it impossible for them to go back and look for the heart. When they became aware of the dim blowing horns in the wood, sounds of dogs baying far off, and they all fell silent. As they sat, it seemed they could hear the noise of a great hunt going on to the north of the path, though they saw no sign of it. There they sat for a long while and did not dare make a move. Bumber slept on with a smile on his fat face, as if he no longer cared for all the troubles that vexed them. Suddenly the path ahead appeared some white deer, a hind and fawns, snowy white as the heart had been dark. They gleamed in the shadows before Thorn could cry out. Three of the dwarves had leaped onto their feet and loosened the arrows from their bows. None seemed to find their mark. The deer turned and vanished in the trees as silently as they come, and in vain the dwarves shot their arrows after them. Stop, stop, said Thorin, but it was too late. The excited dwarves wasted their arrows, and now the bows that Bordoin had given them were useless. They were a gloomy party that night, and the gloom gathered still deeper on them in the following days. They had crossed the enchanted stream, but beyond it the path seemed like straggle on just as before. And in the forest, they could see no change. Yet, if they had known more about it, and considering the meaning of the hunt and the white deer that appeared upon their path, they would have known that they were at last drawing towards the eastern edge, and would have soon have come, if they had kept up their courage and their hope, to thinner trees and places where the sunlight came again. But they did not know this, and they were burdened with the heavy body of Bumber, which they had to carry along with them as best as they could, taking the wearisome task in turns of four, each while the others shared their packs. If these had not become all too light in the last few days, they would never have managed it. But a slumbering and smiling Bumber was a poor exchange for packs filled with food, however heavy. A few days of time came. There was practically nothing left to eat or drink. Nothing wholesome they could see growing in the woods, only funguses and herbs with a pale leaves and unpleasant smell. About 4 days from the enchanted stream, they came to a part where most of the trees were beeches. Beeches, like... Okay, I bet that's spelled Beecah. But it also might be sound like beaches, Beach. Yes, right. Is it? Yes, that's how you spell beach. Why am I questioning this? Where am I? They were at first inclined to be cheered by the change, for there was no undergrowth and shadow was not so deep. There was a greenish light about them, and in places they could see some distance from either side of the path. Yet, light only showed them endless lines of stale gray trunks, like the pillars of a huge twilight hall. There was a breath of air and a noise of wind, but it was a sad sound. Few leaves came rustling down to remind them that outside autumn was coming on. Their feet, their feet ruffled among the dead leaves of countless other autumns that drifted over the banks of the path from the deep red carpets of the forest. Still, Bumber slept, and they grew very weary. At times they heard disquieting laughter. Sometimes there was singing in the distance, too. The laughter was the laughter of far voices, not of goblins, and the singing was beautiful, but it sounded eerie and strange. And they were not comforted. Rather, they hurried on from those parts what strength they had left. 2 days later, they found their path giving downwards, and before long they were in a valley filled with almost entirely with a mighty growth of oaks. Is there no end to this accursed forest? Said Thorin. Someone must climb a tree and see if he can get his head above the roof and take a look around. The only way is to choose the tallest tree. The only way is to choose the tallest tree that overhangs the path. Of course, somebody meant Bilbo. They chose him because to be of any use, the climber must get his head above the topside leaves, and so he must be light enough for the highest and slenderest of branches to bear him. Poor Mr. Baggins had never had such practice in climbing trees, but they hoisted him up in the lowest branches of an enormous oak that grew right onto the path. And up he had to go as best as he could. He pushed his way through the tangled twigs, not wigs, twigs with many a slap in the eye, as he was greened and geamed from the old bark of the greater boughs. More than once he slipped and caught himself just in time, and at last, after a dreadful, not deadly. Why do I want this to be terrible? In a difficult place where there seemed to be no convenient branches at all, he got near the top. All the time, he was wondering whether there were no spiders in the trees, as he was going to get down again, except where in the trees, and how he was going to get down again, except by falling. In the end, he poked his head above the roof of the leaves, and then he found spiders all right, but they were only small ones of ordinary size, and they were after the butterflies. Bilbo's eyes were nearly blinded by the light. He could hear the dwarves shouting up at him from far below, but he could not answer, only hold on and blink. The sun was shining brightly, and it was a long while before he could bear it. When he could, he saw all around him a sea of dark green, ruffled here and there by the breeze. They were everywhere. Oh, and they were everywhere, hundreds of butterflies. I expect they were a kind of purple emperor, a butterfly that loves the top of trees. Oak woods, not trees. Eh. That's not the same thing, but I guess they're just being really more specific. But these are not purple at all. They were dark, dark velvety black, without any markings to be seen. He looked at the Black Emperors for a long time. He enjoyed the feel of the breeze in his hair and on his face, the link of cries from the dwarves, who were now simply stamping with impatience down below, reminded him of his real business. It was no good. Gaze as he might, he could see no end to the trees and leaves in any direction. His heart, that had been lightened by the sight of the sun and the fell of the wind, sank back into his toes. And there was no food to go back to. Down below. Actually, as I have told you, they were not far off from the edge of the forest, and if Bilbo had any sense to see it, the tree that he climbed, though it was tall in itself, was standing near the bottom of a wide valley, so that that from its top trees seemed to swell all around the edges of a great bowl. He could not expect to see how far the forest lasted. Still, he did not see this, and he climbed down full of despair. He got to the bottom again and at last scratched, hot, and miserable. And he could not see anything in the gloom below when he got there. His report soon made the others as miserable as he was. The forest goes on forever and ever and ever in all directions. And whatever will we do? What is the use of studying a hobbit? They cried, as if it was his fault. They did not care tuppence about the butterflies, and they only made more angry when he told them the beautiful breeze, which they were too heavy to climb and feel. That night they ate their very last scraps and crumbs of food. And next morning, when they woke, the first thing they noticed is that they were still gnawingly hungry. And the next thing that it was raining, and that here and there the drip from it was dropping heavily on the forest floor, and that only reminded them that was only partially thirsty, without doing anything to relieve them. You could not quench a terrible thirst by standing under giant oak trees and waiting for a chance and strip to fall on your tongue. The only scrap of comfort came unexpectedly from Bumber. He woke up suddenly and started scratching his head. He could not make out where he was at all, nor why he had felt so hungry, for he had forgotten everything that had happened since they started the journey that May morning long ago. The last thing he remembered was the party at the hobbit's house. It had great difficulty making him believe their tale of all the adventures they had since. Okay, so it's a memory pool? Interesting. Gonna have to jot that one down to see if I run a game of D&D and see if any players fall for that. I doubt it, though. I wouldn't be that mean. When he heard there was nothing to eat, he sat down and wept for his very weak and wobbly legs. Why did I even wake up? He cried. I was having such beautiful dreams. I dreamed I was walking in a forest. It was rather like this one, only lit with torches and trees and lamps swinging from branches and fires burning on the ground. There was a feast going on forever. A woodland king was there with a crown of leaves, and there was merry singing. And I could not count or describe the things that were to eat and drink. You need not try, said Thorin. In fact, if you can't talk about something else, you better be silent. We are quite annoyed enough with you as it is. If you hadn't waked up, we would have left you to your dreams in the forest. You are no joke to carry on even after weeks of short commons. There is nothing now to be done but to tighten the belts around their empty stomachs, hoist their empty sacks and packs, and trugs along on the track without any great hope of ever getting to the end before they lay down and died of starvation. This they did all day, going very slowly and wearily, while Bumber kept on wailing that his legs could not carry him, and that he wanted to lie down and sleep. No, you don't, they said. Let your legs take their share. We've carried you far enough. All the same, he suddenly refused to go a step further and flung himself on the ground. Go on if you must, he said. I'm just gonna lie here and sleep and dream of food. And if I can't get any other way, I hope I'll never wake up again. At that very moment, Balin, who was a little way ahead, called out, What was that? I thought I saw a twinkle in the light forest. Right, I saw a twinkle of the light in the forest. There we go. The owl looked, and after a longish way off, it seemed they saw a red twinkle in the dark. Then another, and another sprang outside it. Even Bumber got up, and they hurried along then, not caring if it was trolls or goblins. The light was in front of them, and to the left of the path. When at last they had drawn level with it, it seemed plain that the torches and fires were burning into the trees, but it was a long way off their track. It looks as if your dreams were coming true, gasped. Oh, my dreams. So my dreams were coming true, gasped Bumber, puffing behind. He wanted to rush straight off into the wood after the lights, but the others remembered all too well the warning of the wizard in Borm. A feast would be no good if we ever get back alive from it. But without a feast, we shan't be moving alive much longer anyway, said Bumber, and Bilbo heartily agreed with him. They argued about it backwards and forwards for a long while, until they agreed, at length, to send out a couple of spies to creep near the lights and find out more about them. But then they could not agree on who was to be sent. No one seemed anxious to run the chance of being lost and never finding his friends again. In the end, despite warnings, Hunger decided, because Bumber kept on describing all the good things that were being eaten, according to his dream, in the woodland feast. So they all left the path and plunged into darkness together. After a good deal of creeping and crawling, they peered around the trunks and looked into a clearing where some trees had felled and grown and the ground leveled. There were so many people there, elvish-looking folk, all dressed in green and brown, sitting on saw rings, felled trees in a great circle. There was a fire in the midst, and there were torches fastened to some of the trees round about it. The most splendid sight of all, they were eating and drinking and laughing merrily. The smell of the roast meats were so enchanting that, waiting to consult one another, every one of them got up, scrambled forward into the ring with the one idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first one stepped into the clearing than all the lights went out, as if by magic. Someone kicked the fire and it went up in rockets and glittering sparks and vanished. They were lost in a complete lightless dark, and they could not find one another. Not for a long time, at any rate. After blundering frantically in the gloom and falling over logs, bumping crash into trees, and shouting and calling till they must have walked over that waked everything in the forest for miles. At last they managed to gather themselves in a bundle and count themselves by touch. By that time they had, of course, quite forgotten which direction that the path lay, and they were still hopelessly lost by morning. There was nothing for it but to settle down for the night where they were. They did not dare search on the ground for scraps of food, for fear of becoming separated again. But they had not been lying long, and Bilbo was only just getting drowsy, when Dory, whose turn it was to watch first, said in a low whisper, "The lights are coming out again. Over there, and there are more of them than ever." Up they all jumped. There, sure enough, not far away, were scores of twinkling lights. They heard voices and laughter quite plainly. They crept slowly towards them in a single line, each touching the back of one in front. When they got near, Thorin said, "No rushing forward this time. No one is stir from hiding until I say so. I shall send Mr. Baggins alone first to talk to them. They won't be frightened of him." "But what about me of them?" thought Bilbo. "And anyway, I hope they won't do anything nasty to him." When they got to the edge of the circle full of lights, they pushed Bilbo suddenly from behind. Before he had time to slip on his ring, he stumbled forward into the full blaze of the fire and torches. It was no good. All went out with lights again, and complete darkness fell. If it had been difficult collecting themselves before, it was far worse this time. And they simply could not find the hobbit. Every time they counted themselves, it made 13. They shouted and called, "Bilbo Baggins! Hobbit! You dreaded hobbit! Hi, hobbit! Confis... Give me a second. Confiscate? I'll have to look that up later. Where are you, and the others of that sort?" But there was no answer. They were just giving up hope when Dory stumbled across by sheer luck. In the dark, he fell over what we thought was a log, and he found it was a hobbit curled up fast asleep. It took it's a, no, there's no great here. It took a deal of shaking to wake him, and when he was awake, he was not pleased at all. I was having such a lovely dream, he grumbled. All about the most gorgeous dinner. Good heavens, he's gone like Bumber, they said. Don't tell us about dreams. Dream diners, aren't they? Good. Dream diner, dream dinners aren't any good, and we can't share them. I said diners. Maybe I want to go to a diner eventually. Hmm. Something to think about. Uh, they're the best. I'm likely to get in this beastly place, he muttered, as he lay down beside the dwarves and tried to go back to sleep and find his dreams again. But that was not the last of the lights in the forest. Later, when the night must have been getting old, Healy, who was watching them, came across and aroused him all again, saying, "There's a regular blaze of lights. They'd begun not far away." Hundreds of torches and many fires may have been lit suddenly and by magic. And hark to the singing and harps. After laying and listening for a while, they found that they could not resist the desire to go nearer, and tried once more to get help. Up they got in, and this time the result was disastrous. The feast that they saw was now greater and more magnificent than before, and at the head of a long line of feasters sat a woodland king, with a crown of leaves upon his golden hair, very much as Bumber had described the figure in his dream. The elvish folk were passing bowls from hand to hand and across fires, and some were harping and more were singing. If this will let me. Oh, you're not doing that to me today. All right, you sassy little thing, don't you dare do that to me now. All right, that's better. All right, that's better. Some were harping and many were singing. Their gleaming hair was twined with flowers, green and white gems glinted on their collars and their belts, and their faces and their songs were filled with mirth. Lord and clear and fair were these songs, and out stepped Thorin into the midst. Dead silence fell in the middle of a word, and out went all the lights. The fires leaped up in black smokes, and ashes and cinders were in their eyes of the dwarves, and the wood was filled with their clamoring, their cries. Bilbo found himself running round and round, as he thought, calling and calling, "Dory, Dory, Ori, On, Glorin, Philly, Gilly, Bomber, Biffer, Borfer, Dorlin." I don't know why I got an accent there, but I did. Balin, and Thorin Oakenshield. While people he could not see nor feel were doing all the same around him, with the occasional Bilbo thrown in, but the cries of the others got suddenly farther and fainter, as though after a while it seemed to him they changed their yells and cries for help in a far distance. All noise at last died right away, and he was left alone in complete silence and darkness. That was one of his most miserable moments, but he soon made up his mind, and it was no good to try to do anything till day came with some light, and quite useless to go blundering about tiring himself out with no hope of breakfast to revive him. So he sat himself down with his back to a tree, and not for the last time fell to thinking of his far distant hobbit hole with its beautiful pantries, He was deep in thought of bacon and eggs and toaster and butter when he felt something touch him. Something like a strong, sticky string that was against his left hand. When he tried to move, he found his legs were already wrapped up with the same stuff, so that he got up and fell over. Then, I'm gonna preface this now. If you're an arachnophobe, leave now. Or at least mute it for... let's say 20 minutes for now. Let's go with that. That 20 minutes sounds like a safe thing. But yeah, if you're an arachnophobe, mute, mute the mute the tab or switch to a different stream for 20 minutes. Then the great spider, who had been busy tying him up while he dozed, came from behind him and came at him. He could only see the thing's eyes, but he could feel its hairy legs as it struggled to wind its abdominal what's abdomen pull? Oh, why is my brain thinking this is not how it's spelled, but like I know that's how it's what that's not how the word spells, but I know how it sounds. Abdominal threads round and around him. It was lucky that he had come to his senses in time. Soon he would not have been able to move at all. As it was, he had a desperate fight before he got free. He beat the creature off with his hands as it was trying to poison him, keep him quiet, as small spiders do to flies, until he remembered his sword. And he drew it out, and the spider jumped back. He had time to cut its legs loose. After that, it was his turn to attack, and the spider, evidently not used to things that carried such strings at their sides, would have hurried away quicker. Bilbo came at it before it could disappear and struck it with his sword right in the eye. And then went mad and leaped and danced and flung its legs out in horrible jerks until he killed it with another stroke. Then he fell down and remembered nothing more for a long while. There was the usual dim gray light of the forest day about him when he came to his senses. The spider lay dead beside him, and his sword blade that was stained black. Somehow, the killing of a giant spider, all alone by himself in the dark, without help of a wizard or the dwarves, or of anyone else, made a great difference to Mr. Baggins. He felt like a different person. He much fiercer and bolder in spite of an empty stomach. He wiped his sword on the grass and put it back in his sheath. I'll give you a name, he said to it. I shall call you Sting. After that, he set out to explore. The forest was grim and silent, but obviously, he had first of all to look for his friends, who were not likely to be very far off, unless they had been prisoners by the elves, or worse things. Bilbo felt that it was unsafe to shout, and stood a long while, wondering in what direction the path lay, in what direction he should go to look for the dwarfs. Oh, why do we not remember old Borns of and Gandalf's? What mess are we in now? He lamented. I only wish it was we. It is horrible being all alone. In the end, he made a good guess, as he could, at the direction for which the cries of help had come in from the night. And by luck, he was born with a good share of it. He guessed more or less right, as you will see. Having made up his mind, he crept along as cleverly as he could. Hobbits are clever at quietness, especially in the woods, as I've already told you. Also, Bilbo had slipped on his ring before he started. This is why spiders neither saw nor heard him coming. As he picked up his way stealthily from some distance, when he noticed a place of dense black shadow ahead of him, black even for that forest, like a pitch of midnight that had never been cleared away. As he drew nearer, he saw that it was made of spider webs, one behind and over, entangled with another. Suddenly he saw it too. There were spiders, huge and horrible, sitting in the branches above him. And ring or no ring, he trembled with fear least they should discover him. Standing behind a tree, he watched the group of them for some time, and then the silence and stillness of the wood he realized that the loathsome creatures were speaking to one another. Voices were a sort of thin creaking and hissing, but he couldn't make out any of the words that they said. They were talking about oh yeah, but he could make out many of the words they said. They were talking about the dwarves. It was a sharp struggle, but worth it, said one. What a nasty thick skins they have, to be sure, but I'll wager there's good juice inside. Aye, they'll make fine eating when they've hung up for a bit, said another. Don't hang it for too long, said a third. They're not as fat as they might be, but feeding none too well of late, I should guess. Kill him, I say, is the fourth. Kill him now and hang him dead for a while. They're dead now, I warrant. They are not. I saw one struggling just now. Just coming around, I should say, after a beautiful sleep. I'll show you. And with that, one of the fat spiders ran along a rope till it came into a dozen bundles hanging in a row from a high branch. Bilbo was horrified. Now they noticed that for the first time, dangling in the shadow, the dwarf's foot sticking out from the bottoms of the bundles. Or here and there a tip of a nose, or a bit of beard, or of a hood. To the fastest of the bundles the spiders went. His poor old bumper, I'll bet, thought Bilbo, and nipped hard at the nose that had struck out. There was a muffled yelp inside, and a toe shot up and kicked the spider straight hard. There was life in Bumper still. There was noise like kicking like of a flappy football. I think in the case of this football, it's a soccer ball. Although to be fair, I think that football should be the same term for everything. Well, should be the soccer ball. I don't know what we would call the actual football with what we use in football, but I think we would call it something else. Ball and the enraged spider fell off the branch, only catching itself with its own threads just in time. The others laughed. You're great white, they said. The meat's alive and kicking. I'll soon put an end to that, hissed the angry spider, climbing back onto the branch. Bilbo saw at that moment had come forward he must do something. He could not get up at the brutes, but he had nothing to shoot with. But looking through, he saw that in this place there were many stones lining what appeared to be now a dry little watercourse. Bilbo was a pretty fair shot with a stone. It did not take him long to find a nice, smooth, egg-shaped one that fitted his hand cozily. As a boy, he used to practice throwing stones at things until rabbits and squirrels or even birds got out of his way as quick as lightning if they saw him stoop. And even grown up, he still had spent a deal of his time at quoits and dart throwing, shooting at the wand, bowls, nine pips, and other quiet games of aiming and throwing sword indeed. You could do lots of things besides blowing smoke rings, asking riddles, and cooking that I haven't time to tell you about. There is no time now. While he was picking up stones, the spider reached Bumper, and as soon as he would have been dead, At that moment, Bilbo threw. The stone struck the spider pluck on the head, and it dropped senselessly from the tree, flopped to the ground with its legs all curled up. The next stone went whizzing through a big web, snapping its cords, and taking off the spider sitting in the middle of it. Whack! Dead. After all, there's a great deal of commotion in the spider colony. And then they forgot the dwarfs for a bit, and I can tell you, they could not see Bilbo, but they could not make any good guess at the direction from which the stones were coming. As quick and as lightning as they came running and swinging down towards the hobbit, flinging their long threads in all directions, till the air was covered in some full of wavering snares. Bilbo, however, slipped away to a different place. The idea came to him to lead furious spiders further and further away from the dwarves. as he could to make them curious, excited, and angry all at once. When 50 had gone off to the place where he had stood before, he threw some more stones at these, and others began to stop behind. And dancing among the trees, he began to sing a song to infuriate them and bring them all after him. Also, to let the dwarves hear his voice. This is what he sung. Let me double check my shares. Okay, no, I think we're good. Old fat spider spinning in a tree. Old fat spider can't see me. Attercop, won't you stop spinning your spinning and look at for me? Old Tommy Noddy, big body. Old Tommy Noddy gets by me. Attercop, down you drop. You'll never catch me up your tree. Not very good, perhaps, but then you remember what he must. Then you must remember he had to make it up himself, and in the spur of a very awkward moment. It did what he wanted anyway, as he sang and threw more stones and stamps. Practically, all the spiders in the place came after him. Some dropped to the ground, others raced along the branches, swung from tree to tree, or cast new ropes across the dark spaces. They made for his noise far quicker than he expected. They were frightened, frightfully angry, quite apart from the stones. No spider had ever liked being called Addercop and Tom or Naughty, and of course, this is insulting to anybody. Huff Bilbo scuttled to a fresh place, but several of the spiders had run out at different points into the glade where they lived and were busy spinning webs all across spaces between the tree stems. Very soon, the spider, no, not the spider, a hobbit, would be caught in the thick fence of them all around him. That, at least, was the spider's idea. Standing now in the middle of them was the hunting and spinning insects. Bilbo plucked up his courage and began a new song. Lazy lob and crazy cob, all weaving webs to wind me. I'm far more sweet than the other meats, but still they cannot find me. Here I am, naughty little fly. You are fat and lazy. You cannot trap me though you try. And your cobweb's crazy. With that, he turned and found that the last sequence. With that, he turned and found that the last space between two tall trees had been closed with a web. But with luck, not a proper web. Pulling with strands and double thick spider rope ran hastily backwards and forwards from trunk to trunk. Out came his little sword. He slashed the threads to pieces and went off singing. The spiders saw the sword, though I don't suppose they knew what it was. At once the whole lot of them came hurrying after the hobbit along the ground, and then the branches and the high legs wavering, nippers and spiners and snapping, eyes popping, full of wrath and rage. They followed him into the forest until Bilbo had gone far as he dared. Then quietly as a mouse, he stole back. He had precious little time, he knew, but the spiders were disgusted and came back to the trees where the dwarves still hung. In the meanwhile, he had to rescue them. The worst part of the job was getting up to the long branch where the bundles were dangling. I don't suppose if he had managed it if a spider had not luckily left a rope hanging down. With its help, though it stuck to his hand and hurt him, he scrambled up, only to meet with a slow sow of wicked fat by a spider hurrying behind to guard the prisoners, and they were busy pinching them with him to see which was the juiciest to eat. They had thought of starting the feast while the others were away, but Mr. Baggins was in a hurry, and before the spider knew what was happening, he put a sting. Oh, it felt his sting, and rolled off the branch dead. Bilbo's next job was to loose a dwarf. What was he to do? If he cut the string which hung him up, the wretched dwarf would tumble thump to the ground in a good way below, wiggled along the branch, which made all the poor dwarfs dance and dwindle like ripe fruit. He reached the first bundle. Feely or Killy, he thought. Up by the tip of the blue hood sticking on top. Most likely Philly, he thought. Up by the tip of the long nose sticking out for the winding threads. He managed by leaning over to cut out most of the strong sticky threads that bound him round, and then, sure enough, with a kick and a struggle, most of Feely emerged. I'm afraid Bilbo actually laughed at the sight of him jerking with his stiff arms and legs as he danced on the spider string under his armpits. Just like one of those funny toys bobbling on wire. Somehow or another, Feely got onto the branch and then did his best to help the hobbit. Oh, or did his best to help the yep. Although he was feeling very sick and ill from spider poison and from hanging for the most of the night, and the next day wound round and round with his little nose to breathe through. It took him ages to get the beastly stuff out of his eyes and eyebrows. As for his beard, he had to cut most of it off. Well, between then they started to gnaw up. First one dwarf, then another, slash them free. Then none of them were better off than Feely. Some of them were worse. Some hardly been able to breathe at all. Long noses are sometimes useful, you see, and some have been poisoned. In this way, they rescued Keely, Buford, Dory, and Nori. Poor Bumber was so exhausted he was the fattest, and it constantly pinched and poked. They just rolled off the branch and fell flop onto the ground. Fortunately, onto leaves, and lay there. But there were still 5 dwarves hanging at the end of the branch when the spiders began to come back, more full of rage than ever. Bilbo immediately went down to the branch to the nearest tree trunk and kept back those that crawled up. He had taken off his ring when he rescued Feely and forgot to put it back on. So now they all began to sputter and hiss. Now we see you, nasty little creature. He'll eat you and leave your bones and skin hanging in a tree. Ugh, he got a sting, has he? Well, we'll get him all the same. And then we'll get him head downwards for a day or two. While this was going on, the other dwarves were working with the rest of the captives and cutting the threads with their knives. Soon all would be free. Though it was not clear what would happen after that. The spiders had caught them pretty easily the night before, but that had been unaware and then in the dark. This time, they looked like a horrible battle. Like being this time, they looked like being grammar's word for this. Suddenly, Bilbo noticed that some of the spiders had gathered around Bumper on the floor and tied him up again or were dragging him away. He gave a shout and slashed at the spiders in front of him. They quickly gave way, and he scrambled and fell down the tree right in the middle of those on the ground. His little sword was something new in a way of stings for them. How it darted to and fro, it shone with delight as he stabbed at them. Half a dozen were killed because the rest drew off and left Bumper to Bilbo. Come down, he shouted to the dwarves on the branch. Don't sit up there and be netted. For he saw spiders swarming up all the neighboring trees and crawling along the boughs above the heads of the dwarves. Down the dwarves scrambled and trembled, or jumped, or dropped. 11 all in a heap, most of them were very shaky with their other legs. There at last, 12 of them, counting poor old Bumper, was being propped up on either side by his cousin Buford and his brother Bulfer. And Bilbo was dancing and weaving sting, and hundreds of angry spiders were goggling at them. Yeah, I think it would be goggling. Goggling at them round and round. Around and about and above. It looked pretty hopeless. Then the battle began. Some of the dwarves had knives and sticks. All of them could get at stones. And Bilbo had his elvish dagger. Again and again, the spiders were beaten off, and many of them were killed. But it could not go on for long, and Bilbo was nearly tired out. And only 4 of the dwarves were able to stand firmly, and soon they would be overpowered like weary flies. Already, the spiders were beginning to weave their webs all around them, again from tree to tree. In the end, Bilbo could think of no plan except to let the dwarves and into the secret of his ring. He was rather sorry about it, but he could not be helped. I'm going to disappear, he said. I should draw the spiders off and you must be kept together and make the opposite direction. To the left there. That is the way towards the place where we last saw the elf fires. It was difficult for to get them to understand what with their dizzy heads and shouts and the whacking of sticks and throwing stones. But alas, Bilbo felt he could delay no longer. The spiders were drawing their circle ever closer. He suddenly slipped on his ring. To the great astonishment of the dwarfs, he vanished. Soon there came the loud sound of Lazy Lob and Addercop among the trees away on the right. That upset the spiders greatly. They stopped advancing and were off in the direction of that voice. Addercop made them so angry that they lost their wits. Then Balin, who had guessed Bilbo's plan better than the rest, led an attack. The dwarves huddled together in a knot, and sent a shower of stones, drove the spiders off on the left, and burst through the ring. Away beyond them, now the shouting and singing suddenly stopped. Hoping desperately that Bilbo had not been caught, the dwarves went on. Not fast enough, though. They were sick and weary, and they could not go much better than a hobble and a wobble. Though many of the spiders were close behind, even now and then they had to turn and fight the creatures that were overtaking them. And already some spiders were in the trees above them and throwing down their long clinging threads. Things were looking pretty bad again when suddenly Bilbo appeared and charged into the astonished spiders unexpectedly from the side. Come on, he shouted. I will do the stinging. And he did. He darted backwards and forwards, slashing at spider threads, hacking at their legs, and stabbing at their fat bodies if they came too near. The spiders were swelled with rage and spluttered and frothed and hissed in horrid curses. Hissed out horrid curses. But they had become mortally afraid of Sting and dared not come very near. Now that it had come back, so cursed as they would, their prey moved slowly but steadily away. It was a most terrible business, and it seemed to take hours. But at last, just when Bilbo felt that he could not lift his hand for a single stroke more, the spiders suddenly gave it up and followed them no more, went back disappointingly to their dark colony. The dwarves then noticed that they had come to the edge of a ring where elf fires had been before. Whether it was one of those they had seen the night before, they could not tell. But it seemed that some good magic lingered in some spots, which the spiders did not like. At any rate there, the light was greener and the moss less thick and threatening, and there he had a chance to rest and draw some breath. There they lay for some time, puffing and panting. But very soon they began to ask questions. They had to have a whole vanishing business carefully explained, and finding the ring interested them so much that a whole while they forgot of their own troubles. Colin was particular, insisted in having the Gollum story, riddles and all, told all over again, with the ring in its proper place. But after a time, the light began to fail, and then other questions were asked. Where were they, and where was the path? Was their path, and where was there any food, and what they were going to do next? These questions they asked over and over again, and it was from little Bilbo that they seemed to expect the answers. From which you can see they had to change their opinion of Mr. Baggins very much. They had begun to have a great respect for him, as Gandalf had said they would. Indeed, they had really expected him to think of some wonderful plan for helping them. They were not merely grumbling. They only knew too well that they would soon have all died if it had not been for the hobbit. They thanked him many times. Some of them even got up and bowed right to the ground before him. Though they fell over with some effort and could not get on their legs again for some time. Knowing the truth about the vanishing did not lessen their opinion of Bilbo at all, for they saw that he had some wits, as well as luck, and a magic ring. And all three were very useful possessions. In fact, they praised him so much that Bilbo began to feel there was something of a bold adventure about himself after all, though he would have felt a lot bolder still if there had been anything to eat. But there was nothing at all, and none were too fit to go on and look for anything. or searched for the lost path. The lost path. No other idea where it would come to Bilbo's tired head. He just sat there, sat staring in front of him at the endless trees. And after a little while, they all fell silent again. All except Balin. Long after, while the others stopped talking and shut their eyes, he kept muttering and chuckling to himself. Call him, well, I'll be best. So that's how he sneaked past me, is it? Now I know. Just crept quietly along, did you? Mr. Baggins. Buttons all over the doorstep. Good old Bilbo, Bilbo. He fell asleep, and there was complete silence for a time. That's good. I really wish I had tea. I had to finally get rid of my well, it was an old Keurig coffee thing, but I used it mainly for tea. Unfortunately, it leaks, and I got fed up with it today. It's like, well, okay, I guess it leaked enough for me today, so it must go to the trash. It must go. I don't know why I rhymed. I guess I'm in just one of those moods. Actually, I think that was more vague than a something to consider. All of a sudden, Dwylin opened an eye, and looked around about. Where's Thorin? He asked. There was a terrible shook. Of course, there were only 13 of them. 12 dwarves and a hobbit. Where indeed was Thorin? They wondered what evil fate had befallen him. Magic or dark monsters? And shuddered as they lost in the forest. There they were dropped off one by one into uncomfortable sleep, full of horrible dreams, and as evening wore to black night. And there we must leave them for the present. Too sick and weary to set guards or take turns watches. Thorin had been caught, and much faster than they had. You remember Bilbo falling like a log to sleep as he stepped into a circle of light. The next time it had been Thorin who stepped forward as the lights went out. But like a stone enchanted, all the noises of dwarves lost in the night, their cries as the spiders caught them and bound them, as all the sounds of the battle next day had passed him over unheard. And there the wood elves had come to him and bound him and carried him away. The feasting people were wood elves, of course. Are not wicked folk. If they had a fault, it is distrust of strangers, though their magic was strong. Even in those days they were wary. They differed from the high elves of the west, and were more dangerous and less wise, for most of them, together with their scattered relations in the hills and mountains, were descended from ancient tribes that never went into the ferry into the west. Yeah, because it's ferry. The ferry in the west. Because that's exactly how you spell fairy fire. There were light elves and deep elves, and the sea elves also went and lived for ages, and grew quite fairer and wiser, and learned and invented their own magic. Invented their magic and their cunning and craft into making beautiful and marvelous things before some came back to the wide world. And in the wide world, what else lingered? In the twilight of our sun and moon, loved the best the stars. And they wandered in the great forests that grew tall in lands that are now lost. They dwelt most so often by the edges of woods, which they could escape from times to hunt or to ride, or run to open lands by moonlight or sunlight. And after the coming of man, they took even more and more to the gloaming and the dusk. Still, elves they were, and were remaining, and that and that is good people. Oh no. I have a bad feeling about this. In a great cave some miles within the edge of Mirkwood, on its eastern side, there lived, at this time, their greatest king. Before his huge doors of a stone river ran out, before his huge doors of stone, a river ran out to the heights of the forest and flowed on and out into the marshes. at the feet of the high woodland lands. This great cave, from which countless smaller ones opened out on the very side, round, far underground, and many passages and wide halls. But it was lighter and more wholesome goblin dwelling than any goblin dwelling, and neither so deep nor so dangerous. In fact, the subjects of the king mostly lived and hunted in the open woods, and had houses or huts on its ground and in their branches. The beeches were their favorite trees. The king's cave was his palace, and a strong place of his treasure. And the strong place of his treasure. In the forest, in the fortress of his people against their enemies. It was also the dungeon of his prisoners. So to the cave they dragged Thorin, not too gently, but they did not love dwarves and thought he was an enemy. In ancient days they had wars with some of the dwarves, whom they accused of stealing their treasure. It is only fair to say that the dwarves gave a different account, and they say that they only took what was their due, for the Elf King had bargained with them to shape his raw gold and silver. Bargained with them to shape his raw gold and silver, and afterwards refused to give them their pay. If the Elf King had a weakness, it was for treasure, especially for silver and white gems, and though his hoard was rich, he was never eager for more. Oh, he was ever eager for more. Why do I keep reading these? uh, I guess probably because my brain's trying to input words, even though I don't see that. What if Richard was ever eager for more, since he had not yet as great as a treasure as other elf lords of old? His people neither minded nor worked under their jewels, nor did they bother much with trade or tilling the earth. All this was well known to every dwarf, though Thorin's family had had nothing to do with this, with the old quarrel I have spoken of. Consequently, Thorin was angry with his treatment. When they took their spell off him, he came to his senses and was determined to say no word of gold or jewels should be dragged out of him. The king looked sternly at Thorin and when he was brought to him and asked many questions. But Thorin only said he was starving. Why did you and your folk 3 times try to attack my people at their merrymaking? Asked the king. We did not attack them, answered Thorin. We came to beg because we were starving. Where are your friends now, and what are they doing? I do not know, but I expect starving in the forest. What were you doing in the forest? Looking for food and drink because we are starving. What brought you into the forest at all? He said. At that, Thorin shut his mouth and would not say another word. Very well, said the king. Take him away and keep him safe until he feels inclined to tell the truth. Even if he waits 100 years. Then the elves put thongs. Is that really what? Oh yeah, that's right. Because there's that you had thongs on him and shut him in one of the inmost caves, strong wooden doors, and left him. They gave him food and drink, plenty of both, if not very fine. For wood elves were not goblins, and were reasonably well behaved even to their worst enemies when they captured them. The giant spiders were only living things, and they had no mercy upon them. The giant spiders were the only living things that had no mercy upon them. There, in the king's poor dungeon, Thorin lay, and after he got over his thankfulness for bread and meat and water, he began to wonder what had become of his unfortunate friends. It was not very long before he discovered. But that belongs to the next chapter, and the beginning of another adventure in which the hobbit again showed his usefulness. Chapter 9. Perils Out of Bound. Or it continues. Is it really weird that I sense the scene from the Hobbit trilogy, which I really haven't seen, if only because I don't really agree with how it was handled. But that's what's going through my mind as I read that. Anyways, The day after the battle with the spiders, Bilbo and the dwarves made one last desperate effort to find a way out before they died of hunger and thirst. Honestly, you have about a week left. Let's see, I think it's like you can survive a week without water, and I think 4 or 5 days without food. Don't quote that. I remember it's definitely at least a week without water. Don't test that. They got up and staggered on in the direction which 8 of the 13 of them guessed to be the one in which path lay. But they never found out if they were right. Such day as there ever was in the forest was fate. Uh-oh. I thought I had to sneeze. Apparently not. Sorry. Such day as there was ever in the forest was fading once more into the blackness of night, when suddenly out sprang light of many torches all around them, like hundreds of red stars. Out leaped wood elves with their bows and spears, and called the dwarves to stop. Halt, not stop. There was no thought of a fight, even if the dwarves had been such in a state that they were actually glad to be captured. Their small knives, their only weapons they had. Be captured. Their small knives, the only weapons they had, would have been no use against the arrows of elves that could hit a bird's eye in the dark. So they simply stopped dead and sat down and waited, all except Bilbo. Popped on his ring and slipped quickly to one side. That is why, when the elves bound the dwarves in a long line, one after another, and counted them, they never found or counted the hobbits. Nor did they hear or feel him trotting along well behind their torchlit as they led off their prisoners into the forest. Each dwarf was blindfolded, but it did not make much of a difference. For even Bilbo, with the use of his eyes, could not see where they were going, and neither he nor the others knew where they had started from anyways. Bilbo had all he d- Bilbo had all he could. Oh, I hate this grammar. Bilbo had all he could do to keep up with the torches, for the elves were making the dwarves go as fast as they could. Sick and weary as they were, the king had ordered them to make haste. Suddenly, the torches stopped, and the hobbit had just time to catch up with them before beginning to cross the bridge. This was the bridge that led across the river to the king's doors. The water flowed dark and swift and strong beneath, and at the far end were gates before the mouth of a huge cave that ran into the side of a steep slope covered with trees. There, the great breaches came right down into the bank till their feet were in the stream. Across this bridge, the elves thrust their prisoners, but Bilbo hesitated in the rear. He did not see. He did not at all like the look of the cavern mouth, and had only made up his mind not to desert his friends just in time to scuttle over at the heels of the last elves before the great gates of the king closed behind with a clang. Inside, the passages were lit with red torchlights, and elf guards sang as they marched along, twisting and crossing echoing paths. These were not like those goblin cities. They were smaller, less deep underground, filled with a cleaner air. In a great hall with pillars hewn out of living stone sat the elven king on a chair of carven wood. On his head was a crown of berries and red leaves, for the autumn was coming again. In the spring he wore a crown of woodland flowers, and in his hand he held a carving of staff of oak. The prisoners were brought before him, though he looked grimly at them. He told his men to unbind them, for they were ragged and weary. Besides, there's no need for ropes here, said he. There is no escape from my magic doors for those who are once brought inside. Long and searchingly he questioned the dwarves what they're doing, where they were going to, and where they were coming from. but he got little more news out of them than out of Thorin. They were swirly and angry and did not even pretend to be polite. "Oh, what have we done, O king?" said Balin, who was eldest left. "Is it a crime to be lost in the forest, to be hungry and thirsty, or to be trapped by spiders? Are the spiders your tame beasts or your pets, if killing them makes you angry?" Such a question, of course, made the king angrier than ever before, and he answered, "If it is a crime to wander in it is a crime to wander in my realm without leave. Do you forget that you are in my kingdom, using the road that my people made? Did you not 3 times pursue and trouble my people in the forest and rouse the spiders with your riot and clamor? After all the disturbance you have made, I have a right to know what brings you here, and if you will not tell me now, I will keep you all in prison until you have learned sense and manners." Then he ordered the dwarves each to be put in a separate cell and to be given food and drink, but not allowed to pass the doors of their own little prisons until at least one of them was willing to tell him all he wanted to know. But he did not tell them that Thorin was also a prisoner with them. It was Bilbo who found that out. Poor Mr. Baggins. It was a weary long time that he lived in a place all alone, and always hiding in, never daring to take off his ring, hardly daring to sleep, even tucked away in the darkness and remotest corners he'd find. For something to do, he took off wandering about Elven King's palace. Magic shut the gates, but he could sometimes get out if he was quick. Companies of wood elves, sometimes with King at their head, would from time to time ride out to hunt or to other business in the woods, or in lands of the east. Though if Bilbo was very nimble, he would slip out just behind him, though it was a dangerous thing to do. More than once he was nearly caught in the doors as they clashed together with the last elf passed. Yet he dare not march among them because of his shadow. Although thin, it was wobbly as it was in torchlight, or for fear of being bumped into and discovered. And when he did not go out, which was not very often, he did no good. He did not wish to desert the dwarves. Indeed, he did not know where in the world to go without them. He could not keep up with hunting the elves all the time when they were out, so he never discovered the ways out of the woods and was left to wander miserably in the forest, terrified of losing himself until a chance came of returning. He was hungry too outside, for he was no hunter, but inside the caves, he'd pick up a living of some sort of stealing food from the store or table when no one was at hand. Like a burglar that can't get away, but I must go on miserably burgling at the same house day after day, he thought. This is the dreariest and dullest part of all this wretched, tiresome, uncomfortable adventure. I wish I was back in my hobbit hole by my own warm fireside with lamp shining. He often wished to, though. Often wished to that he could get a message for help sent to the wizard, but that, of course, was quite impossible. As soon as he realized that if anything was to be done, it would have to be by Mr. Baggins, alone and unaided. Eventually, after a week or two of this sneakiness sort of life, by watching and following the guards and taking what chances he could, he managed to find out that where each dwarf was kept, he found out there were 12 dwarves in different parts of the palace. And after a time, he got to know his way about very well. What was his surprise one day to overhear one of the guards talking and to learn that there was another dwarf in the prison too. An especially deep, dark place. He guessed at once, of course, that this was Thorin, and after a while he found out that his guess was right. At least, after many difficulties, he managed to find the place where no one was about, and to have a word with the chief of the dwarves. Thorin was too wretched to be angry any longer at his misfortune,
was even beginning to think of telling the king all about his treasure and his quest, which shows how low spirited he had become. When he heard Bilbo's little voice at the keyhole, he could barely believe his ears. Soon, however, he made up his mind that he could not be mistaken, and came to the door after a long whisper talk with the hobbit on the other side. So it was that Bilbo was able to take secretly Thorin's message to each of the imprisoned dwarves, telling them that Thorin, their chief, was also imprisoned close at hand. And that no one was to reveal their errand to the king, not yet, not before Thorin gave the word. But Thorin had taken heart again, hearing how the hobbit had rescued his companions from the spiders, and was determined once more not to ransom himself with promises to the king of a share in the treasure, until all hope of escaping in another way had disappeared. Until, in fact, the remarkable Mr. Invisible Baggins, of whom he began to have a very high opinion of indeed, had altogether failed to think of something clever. The other dwarfs quite agreed, and when they got the message, they all thought their own shares in the treasure, which they regarded as theirs, in spite of their plight and the still unconquered dragon, would suffer seriously if the wood elves claimed part of it, and they all trusted Bilbo. Just what Gandalf had said would happen. You see, perhaps that was part of his reasoning for going off and leaving. Bilbo, however, did not feel nearly so hopeful as they did. He did not like being depended on by everyone, and he wished he had the wizard at hand. But it was no use. Probably all the dark distance of Mirkwood lay between him and him. He sat and thought until his head nearly burst. But no bright idea would come. One invisible ring was a fine thing, but it was no much good among the 14. But of course, as you have guessed, he did rescue his friends in the end, and this is how it happened. One day, nosing and wandering about, Bilbo discovered a very interesting thing. The gates were not the only entrance to the caves. A stream flowed under a part of the lowest regions of the palace, and joined the forest river some way further to the east, and beyond the steep slope out of which the main mouth opened. Where this underground watercourse came forth from the hillside, and there was a water gate. There, the rocky roof came along close to the surface of a stream, and from it, portcullis can be dropped right onto the bed of the river to prevent anyone from coming in or out that way. But the portcullis was often open, for a good deal of traffic went in and out. A good deal of traffic went out and in by the water gate. If anyone had come in that way, he would have found himself in a dark, rough tunnel leading deep into the heart of the hill. But at one point where it passed under the caves, the roof had cut away and covered with great oaken trapdoors. These opened upwards into the king's cellars. There stood barrels and barrels and barrels, for the wood elves, and especially their king, were very fond of wine, though no vines grew in these parts. The wine and other goods were brought from far away, from their kinsfolks in the south, or from the vineyards of Man in the distant lands. Hiding behind one of the largest barrels, Bilbo discovered the trapdoors in their use, and lurking there listened to the talk of the king's servants. He learned how the wine and other goods came up the rivers or over land to the long lake. It seemed a town of men still drove there and built out bridges far into the water as protection against enemies of all sorts, especially against the dragon of the mountain. From Lake Town, the barrels were brought up the forest river, and often they were tied together like big rafts and pulled or rowed upstream. Sometimes they were loaded on flatboats. When the barrels were empty, the elves cast them through the trapdoors, or opened the water gate, and out the barrels floated on the stream, bobbing along until they were carried by the current to a place far down the river. The bank shunted out near the town, near to the very eastern edge of Mirkwood. There they were collected and tied together and floated back to Lake Town, which stood close to the point where the forest river floated into Long Lake. For some time Bilbo sat there and thought about this water gate, and wondered if it could be used for their escape of his friends. And at last he had the desperate beginnings of a plan. The evening meal had been taken to the prisoners. The guards were trampling away the passages, taking the torchlight lift with them, and leaving everything in darkness. Then Bilbo heard the king's butler bidding the chief of the guards good night. Now come with me, he said, and taste the new wine, for it has just come in. I shall be hard at work tonight clearing the cellars of the empty food. So let us have a drink first to help the labor. Very good, laughed the chief of the guards. I'll taste wine with you and see if it is fit for the king's table. There is a feast tonight, and it would not do to set up our poor stuff. Send up our poor stuff. When he heard this, Bilbo was all in a flutter, for he saw that luck was with them, and he had chanced all at once to try his desperate plan. He followed the two elves until they entered a small cellar and sat down at a table on which two large flagons were set. Soon they began to drink and laugh merrily. Luck of an unusual kind was with Bilbo then. It must be potent wine to make a wood elf drowsy. But this wine, it seemed, was the heaty vintage of the great gardens of Dorwinion. Okay. Not the weirdest town name ever. Not the weirdest country name, or is it a town name? A town name, not the weirdest town. Not meant for his soldiers or his servants, but for the king's feast only, and for smaller bowls, and not for the butler's great flagons. Very soon the chief guard nodded his head, and he laid on the table and fell asleep. The butler went talking and laughing to himself for a while without seeming to notice, but soon his head too nodded on the table, and he fell asleep and snored beside his friend. Then in crept the hobbit. Very soon the chief guard had no keys, but Bilbo was trotting so fast he could passages. The great bunch seemed to be very heavy in his arms. His heart was often in his mouth, in spite of his ring, for he could not prevent the keys from making it every now and then a loud clink and clank, which put him all in a tremble. First, he unlocked Balin's door, and then locked it again carefully as soon as the dwarf was outside. Balin was surprised, as he could imagine, but glad as he was to get out of some weariness out of his wearisome stone little room. He wanted to stop and ask questions, and know what Bilbo was going to do about it. No time now, said the hobbit. You must follow me. You must all keep together, and not risk getting separated. All of us must escape or none. This is our last chance. If it is found out, goodness knows where the king will put you next. With chains on your hands and feet too, I expect. Don't argue. There's a good fellow. Follow. Yeah, it's fellow. Then off he went from door to door until his following had grown to 12, and none of them any too nimble. With the dark and what with their long imprisonment, Bilbo's heart thumped every time one of them bumped into another, or grunted or whispered in the dark. Drat this dwarf's racket, he said to himself. But all went well, and they met no guards. As a matter of fact, there was a great autumn feast in the woods that night, and in the halls above, nearly all the king's folks were merrymaking. At last, after a bunch of blundering, they came to Thorin's dungeon, far down in a deep place, and fortunately not far from the cellars. Upon my word, said Thorin, when Bilbo whispered to him to come out and join his friends. Gandalf spoke true as usual. A pretty fine burglar you make, it seems, when the time comes. I'm sure we are all forever at your service. Whatever happens after this, or what comes next. Bilbo saw that the time had come to explain his idea as far as he could, but he could not feel at all for sure how the dwarves would take it. His fears were quite justified, for they did not like it one bit, and started grumbling loudly in spite of the danger. We shall all be bruised and battered to pieces, and drowned too, for certain, they muttered. We thought you had at least some sensible notion when you managed to get hold of the keys. This is a mad idea. Very well, said Bilbo, very downcast, and also rather annoyed. Come along back to your nice cells, and I will lock you in again, and you can sit there comfortably and to think of a better plan. I don't suppose I ever shall get a hold of these keys again, even if I feel inclined to try. That was too much for them, and they calmed down in the end. Of course, they had to do just what Bilbo suggested, because it was obviously impossible for them to try and find their way into the upper halls, or to fight their way out of the gates that closed by magic. It was no good grumbling in the passages until they were caught again. So they followed the hobbit down to the lowest cellars, where they crept. They passed the doors where the chief guard and butler could be seen still happily snoring with smiles on their faces. The wine of Dornion brings deep and pleasant dreams. There would be a different expression on the face of the chief guard the next day, even though Bilbo, before they went on, stole in and kindly put the keys back in his belt. This will save him from some sort of trouble, he, of course, said Mr. Baggins to himself. He wasn't a bad fellow, quite decent to the prisoners. It will puzzle them all too well. They will think we have very strong magic to pass through all those locked doors and disappear. Ah, disappear. Oh, we must be busy very quick, as it seems. Colin was told off to watch the guard and butler and give warning if they stirred. The rest went off to the adjoining cellar with the trap doors. There was little time to lose. Before long, as Bilbo knew, some elves were under orders to come down and help the butler get the empty barrels through the doors off to the stream. They were in fact already started standing in rows in the middle of the floor waiting to be pushed off. Some of them were wine barrels, and those were not much of use. They could not easily open at the end with a deal of noise, nor could they easily be secured again. But among them there were several others, which were used for bringing other stuffs, butter, apples, all sorts of things to the king's palace. They soon found 13, with room enough for a dwarf in each. In fact, some were too roomy as they climbed it, and the dwarves thought anxiously of the shaking and bumping they would get inside. Though Bilbo did his best to find straw and other stuff to pack them in so cozily as could be managed in short time. As 12 doors were restored, Thorin had given a lot of trouble. He turned and twisted in his top and grumbled like a large dog in a small kennel. While Balin, who came last, made a great fuss about his air holes that he was stifling, even though his lid was on. Bilbo had done what he could to close the holes on the sides of the barrels, and to fix all the lids safely as he could manage. And now he was left alone again, running around putting finishing touches to the packing, to hope against hope that his plan would come off. It had been a bit too soon. Only a minute or two after Balin's lid had fitted on, there was sound of voices and flicker of lights. A number of elves came laughing and talking to the cellar, singing snatches of a song. They had left a merry feast in one of the halls and were bent on returning as soon as they possibly could. Where's old Gelion, the butler, said one. I haven't seen him at the tables tonight. He ought to be there, no, and show us what is to be done. I shall be very angry if that old slow coach is late, said another. I have no wish to waste time down here while the song is up. Ha ha, came a cry. Here's the old villain with his head on a jug. He must have had a little feast after all to himself and his friend the captain. Take him and wake him, shouted the other impatiently. Calian was not pleased at all to be shaken or wakened, and still less at being laughed at. You're late, he grumbled, and here I am waiting down here while your fellows drink and make merry and forget your tasks. Small wonder if I fall asleep from the weariness. Small wonder, they said, when the explanation and stands close in a hand and a jug. Come give us a taste of your sleeping draught before we fall too. No need to wake the turkey yonder. He has had his share by the looks of it. They drank once round and became might merrier all of a sudden, but they did not quite lose their wits. Save us, Galleon, and cried some. You began your feasting early and muddled your wits. You have stacked some full cats here instead of some empty ones, if there is anything in wait. Go on, get with work. If there is nothing in the feeling of the weights in the idle tosspot's arms, those are what's to go. Oh, and no others, dare I say. Very well, they all answered, rolling the barrels to the opening. On your head it be, if the king's full butter tapes and his breast wines, it is pushed to the river for the lakeman's feast for nothing. Roll, 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 rolling down the hill. Heave ho, splash plump, down they go and down they bump. So they sang as the first barrel and then another rumbled down to the dark opening. It was pushed over into the cold water and some feet below. Some barrels were really empty, and some were tubs, neatly packed with a dwarf each. But down they all went, one after another, with many a clash and a bump, thudded on top of ones below, smacking into the water, jostling against the walls of the tunnel, knocking into one another, and bobbing away down the current. It was just at this moment that Bibble suddenly discovered the weak point of his plan. Most likely you saw it some time ago and laughed at him, but I don't suppose it would have been done in half as well as yourselves in his place. Of course, he was not in a barrel himself, nor was there anything to pack him in. Even if there had been a chance, it looked as though he had certainly lost his friends this time. Nearly all of them had already disappeared through the dark trap door, and get utterly left behind, and have to stay lurking as a permanent burglar in the elf caves forever. For even if he could escape through the upper gates at once, he has precious small chance of finding the dwarves again. He did not know the way to the land to the place where the barrels were collected. He wondered what on earth would have happened to them without him, for he had not had time to tell the dwarves all that he had learned, what he meant to do once they were out of the wood. While all these thoughts were passing through his mind, the elves began to very merry again, sing a song round the river door. Some had already begun to haul on the ropes which pulled on the portcullies of the water gate so as to let all out the barrels as soon as they were afloat below. Down the swift dark streams you go, back to the lands once did know, leave the halls and caverns leave the northern mountainsides and steep, where the forest wide and dim, stoops in shadow, grey and grim, float beyond the world of trees, out into the whispering breeze, past the rush, past the reeds, past the marsh and weeds, through the mist of the risen white, up in Merit Pule at night, follow stars that leap up the heavens cold and steep. Turn down, when dawn comes overhead, over sand, rapid over sand, south the way and south the way, seek the sunlight and light and the day, back to pasture, back to mead, where the neat oxen lay, back to gardens on the hills, where berries swells and fills. Under sunlight, under day, south the way and south the way, down the swift dark stream you go, back to lands you did know. Now the very last barrel was being rolled down the doors. In despair, not knowing what else to do, poor little Bilbo caught hold of it and was pushed over the edge down into the water. He fell and splashed into the dark, cold water, with the barrel on top of him. He came up again, spluttering and clinging to the wood like a rat, but all his efforts he could not scramble on top. Every time he tried, the barrel rolled round and ducked under him again. It was really empty, and it floated lightly like a cork. Though his ears were full of water, he could hear the elves still singing in the cellar above. Then suddenly the trapdoors fell with a boom, and their voices faded away. He was in a dark tunnel and floating in icy water, all alone. You could not count friends that are all packed up in barrels. Very soon, a gray patch came up in the darkness ahead. He heard a creak of the water gate being held open, and he found that he was in the midst of a bobbing and bumping mass of casks and tubs, all pressing together to pass under the arch to get out in the opening of the stream. He had as much as he could to do to prevent him from being hustled and battered into bits, but at last the jostling crowd began to break and swing off, one by one, under the stone arch and way, and then he saw it was no good. Even even if he had managed to get stride for his barrel, there was no room to spare, not even for a hobbit. Between its top up and Sudden's the stopping roof where the gate was. Out they went over the overhanging branches of trees on either bank, Bilbo wondering what the dwarves were feeling, whether a lot of water getting into their tubs. Some of these were bobbing along by him in the gloom. It seemed pretty low in the water. He guessed that they had dwarfs inside. I do hope I put the lids on tight enough, he thought. But before long, he was worrying not too much about himself to remember the other dwarf. Oh, he was worrying too much about himself to remember the dwarves. He managed to keep his head up above the water, but was shivering with the cold. He wondered if he would die of it before luck turned, how much longer he'd have to hang on, whether he could risk the chance of letting go and trying to swim to the bank. The luck turned all right before long. The undying current carried several barrels close to shore. At one point, for a while, they'd stuck against the hidden roof. Then Bilbo took the opportunity of scrambling up to the side of the barrel while it was held steadily by against another. Up he crawled like a drowned rat and lay on top, spread out like balance as best he could. The breeze was cold but better than the water. He had hoped he would not suddenly roll off again when they started off once more. Before long, the barrels broke free again and turned and twisted down the stream and out into the main current. Then he found it quite as difficult to stick on as he had feared, but he managed it somehow. Though it was miserable, though it was miserably uncomfortable, luckily he was very light and the barrel was a big one. And being rather leaky, he had now shipped a very small amount of water. All the same, it was like trying to ride without bridling your stirrups a round belly pony that was always thinking of rolling on some grass. No, I've never ridden a horse, but I can kind of get the idea of it from this description. In this way, at last, Mr. Baggins had come to a place where the trees, on the other hand, grew thinner. You could see the paler sky between them, the dark river open and suddenly wide, and there it had joined to the main river, the Forest River, flowing down in haste from the king's great doors. There was a dim sheet of water no longer overshadowed, and on its sliding surface there was dancing and broken reflections of clouds and stars. Then the hurrying water of the Forest River swept all company of casks and tubs away to the north bank, in which it had been eaten out on a wide bay. This had a shiny shore on her hanging banks, and was whaled at the eastern end of and by a little jutting cap of hard rock. On the shallow shore, most of the barrels ran aground, though many went on to bump against each other on the stony pier. There were people on the lookout on the banks. They quickly pulled and pushed the barrels all together into the shallows, and there they counted them and roped them together and left them till morning. Poor dwarves, Bilbo was not so badly off now. He swept off his barrel and waded ashore, and then sneaked along to some huts so he could see near the water's edge. He no longer thought twice about picking up supper uninvited if he got the chance. He had been obliged to do it for so long he knew it only too well when it was Must be really hungry and not merely politely interested in the dainties of well-fine later. Also, he caught a glimpse of a fire through the trees, and that appealed to him, with his dripping and ragged clothes clinging to him and cold and clammy. There is no need to tell you much of his adventures that night, for now we are drawing near to the end of the eastward journey and coming to the last and greatest adventure. So we must hurry on. Of course, helped by his magic ring, he would get on very well at first. He was given away by his wet footsteps on the trail, dripping what he left, whatever he went and sat, and also began to snivel, and whatever he tried to hide was found out by terrific explosions of his suppressed sneezes. Very soon there was a fine commotion in the village by the riverside. But Bilbo escaped into the woods carrying a loaf and a leather bottle of wine, a pie that did not belong to him. The rest of the night he had to pass wet as he was far. Let me read that again. The rest of the night he had to pass wet as he was and far from a fire, but the bottle helped him do that, and he was actually dozed a little from dry leaves, even though the year was getting late and the air was chilly. He woke up again with a especially loud sneeze. It was already grey morning, and there was a mere racket from down the river. They were making a raft out of barrels, and the raft elves would soon be steering it down to the stream to Lake Town. Bilbo sneezed again. He was no longer dripping, but he felt cold all over. He scrambled down as fast as his stiff legs could take him and managed to, just in time, get to the mast of casks without being noticed in a general bustle. Luckily, there was no sun at the time to cast an awkward shadow, and for mercy, he did not sneeze again for a good while. There was a mighty pushing of poles. The elves were standing in the shallow water, heaved and shoved, the barrels now all lashed together and creaking and freighted. This is a heavy load, some grumble. They float too deep, and others are never empty. If they had come ashore in the daylight, we might have had a look inside. No time now, said the raftman. Shove off. And off they went at last, slowly at first, until they had last passed the point of the rock where the other elves stood to fend off with poles, and then quicker and quicker as they caught the main stream and went sailing away down towards the lake. They had escaped the dungeons of the king and were through the wood, but whether alive or dead still remains to be seen. How long is this chapter? Yeah, that's a rather short chapter. I can do that. I'm going to take a little break. Some water. I'll see that. Let me do a little stretch. Get out of my chair. There we go. All right. That's stretches. Okay. Oh, that's all right. Tell bracelet probably stretch for now. Oh. All right. Again, I'd like to thank y'all for sticking around as I fumble and fumble around words. Yep. As I mumble and fumble around words and all that. I'll eventually learn how to use the microphone correctly. But for now, let us continue on. Last chapter for tonight. Chapter 10. A Warm Welcome. The day grew lighter and warmer as they floated along. After a while, the river rounded a steep shoulder of land and came down upon their left. Under its rocky feet, like an inland cliff, deepest stream had flowed, lapping and bubbling. Suddenly, the cliff fell away, the shore banks sank, the trees ended. Then Bilbo saw a sight. Lands opened wide about him, filled with the waters of the river, which broke up and wandered into 100 winding courses, or halted in marshes and pools darted with isles on every side. But still, strong water flowed unsteadily through the mist. And far away, its dark head in a torn cloud, there loomed the mountain, its near east neighbors to the northeast, and the tumbled land that joined it to them could not be seen. All alone it rose and looked across the marshes to the forest, the lonely mountain. Bilbo had come far through the many adventures to see it, and now he did not like the look of it at least. As he listened to the talk of the raftmen and peered together the scraps of information that let fall, he soon realized that he was very fortunate ever to have seen it at all, even from this distance. Dreary as it had been, his imprisonment, and unpleasant as it was his position, to say nothing of the poor dwarfs underneath him, still, he had been more lucky than he could have guessed. The talk of all the trade that had come and went to the waterways and the growth of the traffic on the river, as the roads out of the east towards Mirkwood vanished or fell into disuse, and the bickerings of the lakemen and the wood elves was about the upkeep of the forest river and the care of the banks. These lands had changed so much since the days when dwarves dwelt in the mountain, days which most people now remembered only as a shadowy tradition. They had changed even in the recent years, and since the last news that Gandalf had any of them, great floods and rains had swollen the waters that flowed east, and there had been an earthquake or two, which some were inclined to attribute to the dragon, alluding to him cheerfully with a curse, and then ominously nod in the direction of the mountain. The marshes and bogs had spread wider and wider on either side. Paths had vanished, and many a rider and wanderer too, if they ever tried to find the lost ways across. The elf road through the wood, which the dwarves had followed on the advice of Borden, now came to a doubtful and little useful end of the eastern edge of the forest. Only the river offered any longer safety from the skirts of Mirkwood in the north of a mountain and the shadowy plains beyond, and the river was guarded by the wood elf's king. So you see, Bilbo had come in the end by the only road that was good. It might have been some comfort to Mr. Baggins shivering on the barrels if he had known that news of this had reached Gandalf far away and given him great anxiety, and that he was in fact finishing this other business, which does not come into this tale, and had getting ready to come in search of Thorn's company. But Bilbo did not know it. Although he knew what the river seemed to go on and on and on forever, he was hungry, and had a nasty cold in the nose, and did not like the way the mountains seemed to frown at him and threaten him as it drew ever nearer. After a while, however, the river took like a mere southerly course, and the mountain receded again. At last, late in the day, the shores grew the shores grew rocky, and the river gathered all of its wandering waters together in a deep, rapid flood, swept along with great speed. The sun had set with turning, and another sweep towards the east. The sweep together towards the forest river, rushed into the long lake. There it had a wide mouth with stony cliff-like gates at either side, whose feet were piled with shingles. A long lake. Bilbo had never imagined that any water that was not the sea could look so big. It was so wide that the opposite shores looked so small and far, but it was so long that it was nearly north. No. But it was so long that its northy end, which pointed out towards the mountain, could not be seen at all. Only from the map did Bilbo know that away up there, where the stars of the Wang were already twinkling, the running river came down into the lake from Dale, with the forest river filled deep with the waters, what might once have been a great steep rocky mountain. It deep rocky valley. At the southern end, the doubled waters poured out again, over high waters, and ran away hurriedly into unknown lands. In the still evening air, the noise of the falls could still be heard like a distant roar. Not far away from the mouth of the
SWO Tenshi said. Sorcery, I gotta go now. See, hope you have a super fun time and a great stream.
All right, have a good night. Thank you for stopping by.
yeah. Not far from the mouth of the forest river was the strange town he heard the elves speak of in the king's cellars. It was not built on the shore, though there were a few huts and buildings there, but right on the surface of the lake, protected from the swirl of the entering river of a promontory of rock which formed a calm bay. A great bridge made of wood ran out to where huge piles made of forest trees were built was built a busy wooden town, not a town of elves, but of men, who dared still dwell here under the shadow of a distant dragon mountain. They still throve on the trade that had come up a great river from the south and was carted and past the falls of their own. But in the great old days, when Dale in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful, and they had fleets of boats on the waters. Some were filled with gold and some with warriors and armor, and there had been wars and deeds which were now only legend. The rotting piles of a greater town could still be seen along the shores when the water sank in a drought. But men remembered little of all that, though still some sang of old songs of the dwarf kings of the mountain, Thorir and Thorin, the race of Durin, and the coming of the dragon and the fall of the lords of Dale. Some sang too that Thor and Theron would come one day. And gold would flow into the rivers, the mountain gates, and all that the land would be filled with new song, and new laughter. But this pleasant legend did not much affect their daily business. As soon as the raft of barrels came in sight, boats rowed out of the piles of the town. Voices hailed the raft stirs. The ropes were cast and the oars were pulled, and soon the raft was drawn out of the forest river and towed away from the round, high shoulder of rock into the little bay of Lake Town. There it was moored and not far away from the shoreward head of the great bridge. Some men would come up from the south and take some of the casks away, and others they would fill with goods that they had brought be taken up to the stream to the wood elves' home. In the meanwhile, the barrels were left afloat while the elves of the raft and the boatmen went to feast in Lake Town. They would have been surprised if they could have seen what would have happened down by the shore after they had gone, and the shades of night had followed them. First of all, a barrel was cut loose by Bilbo. and pushed ashore and opened. Groans came from inside. Crept out a most unhappy dwarf. Wet straw in his dangled beard. He was sore and stiff and so bruised and buffeted. Yeah, buffeted. There we go. And buffeted. He could hardly stand or stumble through the shallow water, the light groaning on the shore. He had famished in a savage look like a dog that had been chained and forgotten in a kennel for a week. It was Thorin, but you could only have it told by his golden chain. You could only have told it by his golden chain, and by the color on his now dirty and tattered sky blue hood, with its tarnished silver tassel. It was some time before.
It's a book he's going to read!
I forgot to put that down there. Thank you, Mr. Midnight, for testing out the sound alerts. Those are gonna scare me more than anything else.
Master Midnight _ 901 said. Master Midnight _ 901 said. Rami a laugh, Rami a laugh, Rami a laugh. Master Midnight _ 901 said. I good. Master Midnight _ 901 said. Hope you good.
I am doing really good, Master Midnight. Going through. Yeah, that.
Master Midnight _ 901 said.
Why are you still?
That's good.
Why are you still?
Master Midnight _ 901 said. A.
You're all having fun with this.
Master Midnight _ 901 Tibby 3D Tibby Sip.
Oh, you're all having fun with this. I'm glad you're all having fun with this. Trying to figure out why.
Master Midnight _ 901 said. Okay, I stop.
No, you are perfectly fine, Master Midnight. I think this is. It's with. I still semi-learning how to use. Over here to the other tab so I can see you better. There you go. All right. Actually, I'm gonna fix that problem.
Master Midnight _ 901
I don't worry. For now I have muted it. Now I have. There we go. Now let's do that. Put that to the Brave browser. Mute that. Let me do a quick. Actually, I know a quick test we can do. Actually, I could just type in here, can I? All right, that should be good now, right? Right? All right, we fixed that problem. All right, we fixed it. Okay, so fix that. Okay, so apparently I had the speech chat thing set to my Mixer's browser section and not the browser to the browser section. If that makes at all sense.
We should be good. We're good now. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, should be good now. But thank you for the sound alert, Master Midnight, and also thank you for the hydrate. I did actually need that. All right, I mean, back into my. I will move that eventually. Let's get back to business. All right, here we go. Turnstar Tassel. It was a long time. It was some time before he could even be polite to the Hobbit. Well, are you alive or dead? Asked Bilbo quite crossly. Perhaps he had forgotten that he had had at least one good meal, more than the dwarves. Also, the use of his arms and legs. Not to speak of greater allowance of air. Oh, and not just. Are you still in prison? Are you free? Or are you free? If you want food, and if you want to go with this silly adventure, it's yours after all, not mine. You better slap your arms and rub your legs, and try to help me with the others. Try to get the others out while there's still a chance. Thorin, of course, saw a sense of this. Soon after a few more groans, he got up and helped the hobbits as well as he could. In the darkness, floundering in cold water, they had difficult and very nasty job of finding which were their right barrels. Knocking the outside, calling only discovered about 6 dwarves that they could answer. They were unpacked and they helped ashore where they sat and lay muttering and moaning. They were soaked and bruised and cramped. They could hardly yet realize that their own they could hardly yet realize their own release or properly thank for it. Waylon and Balin were two of the most unhappy, and it was no good to ask them for help. Buford and Buford were less knocked about and drier, but they laid down and would do nothing. Feely and Keely, however, were young dwarves, and had also been packed more neatly with plenty of straw in their small casks. Came out more or less smiling with only a bruise or two and a stiffness that soon wore off. I hope I never smell the smell of apples again, said Feely. My tub was full of it. To smell apples everlasting when you can scarcely move and are cold and sick of hunger is maddening. I could eat anything in the whole wide world now for hours on end, but not an apple. With the willing help of Feely and Keely, Thorin and Bilbo at last discovered the remainder of the company and got to help them out. Poor fat Bumber was asleep or senseless. Dory, Nori, Ori, Owen, and Gloin were waterlogged and seemed only half alive. They all had to be carried one by one and laid helpless on the shore. Well, here we are, said Thorin, and I suppose we ought to thank our stars and Mr. Baggins. I'm sure he was right to expect it, though I wish he could have arranged more of a comfortable journey. Still, all very much all your service once more, Mr. Baggins. No doubt we should feel properly grateful. When we were fed and recovered, in the meanwhile, what next? I suggest Lake Town, said Bilbo. What else is there? Nothing else could, of course, could be suggested, so leaving in the others, Thorin and Feely and Keely and the Hobbit went along the shore to the great bridge. There were guards at the head of it, but they were not keeping a very careful watch, for it was so long since they had any real need. Except for the occasional squabbles about river trolls, they were friends with the wood elves. Other folk were far away, and some of the younger people in the town openly doubted the existence of any dragon in the mountain, and laughed at the graybeards and gammers who said that
They had seen him flying in the sky in their young days. That being so, he is not being surprised that the guards were drinking and laughing by a fire in their hut, and did not hear the noise of unpacking the dwarves or the footsteps of 4 scouts. Their astonishment was enormous when Thor and Oakenshield stepped in through the door. "Who are you? What do you want?" they shouted, leaping at their feet and groping their weapons. "Thorin, son of Theron, and son of Thor, king of the Undermountain," said the dwarf in a loud voice. And he looked at. In spite of his torn clothes and draggled hood, the gold gleamed around his neck and waist. His eyes were dark and deep. "I have come back. I wish to see the master of your town." Then there was some tremendous excitement. Some of the more foolish ran out of the hut as if they were expected to the mountain to go a golden in the night. The waters of the lake turned yellow again. Turned yellow right away. The captain of the guard came forward. "And who are these?" he asked, pointing to Feely, Keely, and Bilbo. The sons of my father's daughter," answered Thor. "Feely and Keely, the race of Durin, and Mr. Baggins, who has traveled with us out west." "If you've come in peace, lay down your arms," said the captain. "We have none." And it was true enough. Their knives had been taken away from them by the wood elves. And the great sword Orcus, too. Bilbo had his short sword hidden as usual. As usual. We said nothing about it. "We have no need of weapons. We're returning at last to our own, spoken of old. Nor could we fight against so many. You take us to your master." "He is at a feast," said the captain. All the more reason for taking us to him," burst out Feely, who was getting impatient at these solemnities. "We are worn and famished. After a long road, and we have sick comrades. And now make haste. Let us no more woods, or your master may have something to say to you." "Follow me, then," said the captain, with 6 men and about them, and he led them over the bridge, over the gates, and onto the marketplace of the town. There was a wide circle of quiet waters surrounded by the tall pines in which were built by the great houses, and by the long wood trails with many steps and ladders going down to the surfaces of the lake. One great hall shone many lights, and there came a sound of many voices. They passed its doors and stood blinking in the light, looking at the long tables filled with folk. "I am Thorin, son of Thor, and son of Thor, king of the mountain, and I return," said Thorin, and a loud voice came from the door, before the captain could say anything. All leaped to their feet. The master of the town sprang from his great chair, but none rose in greater surprise than the raftmen of the elves, who were sitting there at the lower end of the hall. Pressing forward before their master's table, they cried, "These are prisoners of our king that have escaped, wandering vagabond dwarves that could not give any good account of themselves, sneaking through the woods and molesting our people." Is this true?" asked the master. As a matter of fact, he thought it far more likely than the return of the king under the mountain, if any such a person had ever existed. It is true that we were wrongly waylaid by the elf king and imprisoned without cause as we journeyed back to our land," answered Thorin. "But lock nor bar may hinder the homecoming spoken of old, nor is this town in the wood elves' realm. I speak to the master of the town of men of the lake, not to the raftmen of the king." The master hesitated and looked from one to the other. The elf king was very powerful in those parts, and the master wished for no enmity with him, nor did he think of the old songs giving him his mind to trade and trolls, cargoes, and gold, to which habit he owed disposition. Others were of a different mind, however, and quickly the matter was settled without him. The news had spread from the doors of the hall like fire through all the town. People shouting inside the halls and outside it. The quaws were thronged with hurrying feet. Some began to sing snatches of old songs concerning the return of the king of the under the mountain. Though it was Thor's grandson, not Thor himself, that had come back. did not bother them at all. Others began to sing. Others took up the song and rolled around over the lake. The king beneath the mountains, the king of the carven stone, the lord of silver mountains, still come into his town. His crown shall be upheld, and his harp shall be restrung. His halls shall echo golden to songs of yore resung. The wood shall wave on the mountains and grass beneath the sun. His wealth shall flow in the mountains and rivers will golden run. The streams shall run in gladness, the lakes shall shine and burn, and sorrows fall in sadness at the mountain king's return. They sang and I really liked that. Only there was a great deal more of it, and there was much shouting as well, as the music of harps and fiddles mixed up upon it. Indeed, such excitement had not been known in the town. In the memory of the oldest grandfather, the wood elves themselves began to wonder greatly, and even be afraid. They did not know, of course, how Thorin escaped, and they began to think that their king might have had made a serious mistake. As for the master, he saw there was nothing else for it but to obey the general clamor, for the moment at any rate, and pretend to believe that Thorin was what he said. So he gave up to him his own great chair, and sat Feely and Keely beside him in places of honor. Even Bilbo was given a seat at the high table, and no explanation of where he came in. No songs alluded to him, even in the obscurest ways, and was asked for in general bustle. Soon afterwards, the other dwarves were brought in amid scenes of astonished enthusiasm. They were all doctored and fed and housed and pampered in the most delightful and satisfactory fashion. A large house was given up to Thorin and his company. Boats and rowers were put at their service, and crowds sat outside and sang songs all day, or cheered if any dwarf showed so much as his nose. Some of the songs were old ones, but some of them were quite new and spoken confidently at the sudden death of the dragon, and cargoes of rich presents coming down the lake to deliver town. These were inspired largely by the master and did not particularly please the dwarves, but in the meantime they were all still contented that they grew greatly fat and strong again. Indeed, within a week they were quite recovered, fitted out in fine cloth of their proper colors, with their beards combed and trimmed in proud steps. Thorin looked and walked as if his kingdom was already regained, and Smaug chopped up into little pieces. Then, as he said to the dwarves, good feelings towards the little hobbit grew stronger every day. There were no more groans or grumbles. They drank his health, and they patted him on the back, and they made a great fuss of him when it was just as well. He was not feeling particularly cheerful. He had not forgotten the look of the mountain, nor the thought of the dragon. And besides, he had shocking cold. For 3 days he sneezed and coughed and could not get out. Even after that, his speeches and banquet were limited to, "Thank you very much." Oh yeah, that's how this is how you would sound if you were all nice and stuffed up. Yeah, that makes sense. In the meanwhile, the wood elves had come back up the forest river with their cargoes. There was a great excitement in the king's palace. I never heard what happened to the chief of the guards and the butler. Nothing, of course, was ever said about the keys or barrels while the dwarves stayed in Lake Town, and Bilbo was careful never to become invisible. Still, I dare say more was guessed than was known, though doubtless Mr. Baggins remained a bit of a mystery. In any case, the king knew now the dwarf's errand, or thought he did, and he said to himself, "Very well, we should see. Nor treasure shall be back through Mirkwood without me having something to say in the matter. But I expect they will all come to a bad end, and serve them right. He will, at any rate, did not believe in dwarfs fighting and killing dragons like Smaug. And he strongly suspected attempted burglary or something like that, which shows he was a wise elf and wiser than the men of the town, though not quite right, as we shall see in the end. He sent out his spies about the shore of the lake and as far northward towards the mountain as they would go, and waited. At the end of a fortnight, Thorod began to think of a departure, while the enthusiasm still lasted in the town, and when the time to get help. It would not do to let everyone cool down with the delay, so he spoke to the master and his counselors. Okay, that was a really weird way to split the word. And said that soon he and his company must go towards the mountain. Then, for the first time, the master was surprised and a little frightened. He wondered if Thorn was, after all, really a descendant of the old kings. He had never thought the dwarves would actually dare approach Smog, but he believed they were frauds, would sooner or later be discovered, and turned out he was wrong. Thorn, of course, was really the grandson of the king under the mountain, and there is no knowing what a dwarf will not dare and do for revenge or the recovery of his own. But the master was not sorry at all to let them go. They were expensive to keep, and their arrival had turned things into a long holiday in which business was at a standstill. Let them go and bother Smog and see how he welcomes them, he thought. Certainly, old Thor and Thor's son. And what he said, you must claim your own the hours at hand, spoken of old. For we can offer shall be yours. We trust to your gratitude when your kingdom is regained. So one day, although autumn was getting far on and the winds were cold and leaves were falling fast, 3 large boats left Lake Town, laden with rowers and dwarves, Mr. Baggins, and many provisions. Horses and ponies had sent round by Trish's paths to meet them at their appointed landing place. The masters and his counselors bade them farewell from the great steeps of the town hall that went down to the lake. People sang on the quails and out the windows. The white oars dipped and splashed off. They went north up the lake. On the last stage, there was the long journey. The only person thoroughly unhappy was Bilbo. All right, how long is chapter 11? These chapters are getting shorter, and I'm not sure how I like that. But in any case, chapter 11. Actually, how many chapters are left? Look at the index. Oh. So we only have... There are 19 chapters. So we have, after this one, we have 8 more to go. Oh, we might finish The Hobbit in the next couple of weeks then. Well, if the chapters are this small, they're probably going to be pretty easy to get through. Oh, right, I can turn that on. Actually, I'll just do that later. In 2 days, they rowed up the long lake and passed into the river running. And now they can see all... They could see all the lonely mountain, towering grim, tall before them. The stream was strong and they're growing slow. The end of the 3rd day, some miles up the river, they drew in to the left, or after western bank and disembarked. Here they were joined by the horses with other provisions and necessaries, and the ponies for their own use had been sent to meet them. They packed what they could on the ponies, and the rest was made into a store or under a tent. But none of the men of the town would stay with them, even for the night, so near the shadow of the mountain. Not at any rate until the songs had come true, they said. It was easier to believe in the dragon and less easy to believe in Thorin and the wild parts. Indeed, these shores had no no need of any guard, for all the land was desolate and empty. So their escort left him, making off swiftly down the river and to the shore and the shoreward paths, although the night was already drawing on. They spent on a cold and lonely night, and their spirits fell. The next day they set out again. Balin and Bilbo rode behind, each leading on another pony, heavily laden beside him. The others were some way ahead, picking out a slow road where there were no paths. They made a northwest, slanting away from the river, running and drawing nearer and nearer to the great spur of the mountain that was flung out southwards towards them. It was a weary journey and a quiet and stealthy one. There was no laughter or song or sound of harps, and the pride of hopes would stir in their hearts at the singing of the old songs, for the lake had died away of the plodding gloom. They knew they were drawing near to the end of their journey, and that it might be a horrible end. The land about them grew bleak and barren, though once, as Thorin told them, it had been green and fair. There was little grass, and before long there was neither bush nor tree, only broken and blackened stumps to the speak of ones long vanished. There they came to the desolation of the dragon, and there they had come to the waning of the year. They reached the skirts of the mountain all the same, without meaning of any danger or any sign of the dragon, either the wilderness or no sign of dragon other than the wilderness he made about his lair. The mountain lay dark and silent before them, and even higher above them. They made their first camp on the western side of the southern spur, which ended in a height called Raven Hill. On this there had been an old watch post, but they dared not climb it yet. It was too exposed. As one should. You should never go to a place that's too exposed. Before setting out to search the western spurs of the mountain for the hidden door on which all hopes rested, Thorin sent a scouting expedition to spy out the land to the south where the front gate stood. For this purpose, he chose Balin and Fili and Kili, and with them went Bilbo. They marched under the grey and silent cliffs to the feet of Ravenhill. There the river, after wandering a wide loop under the valley of Dale, turned from the mountain on its road to the lake, flowing swift and noisily. It was bank was bare and rocky, tall and steep above of the stream, and gazing out from it over the narrow water, foaming and splashing among the many boulders, they could see the wide valley, shadowed by the mountain's arms, the gray ruins of ancient houses, towers, and walls. These lies all that's left of Dale, said Balin. All right, who's trying to get a job email? Focusing. Hey Dale, kings, all the shattered valley, rich and pleasant in these days when the bells rang in the town. He looked both sad and grim as he said this. He had been one of Thorin's companions in the day the dragon came. They did not dare follow the river much further towards the gate, but they went beyond into the end of the southern spur, until lying hidden behind a rock they could look out and see the dark cavernous opening in a great cliff wall between the arms of the mountain. Out of it the waters of the running river sprang, and out of it too there came a stream and dark smoke. Nothing moved in the waste, save the vapor and the water, and every now and then again a black and ominous crow. The only sound was the sound of the stony water, and every now and again the harsh croak of a bird. Balin shuddered. Let us return, he said. We can do no more here, and I don't like these dark birds. They look like spies of evil. The dragon is alive and in the halls under the mountain. Then, or I imagine so from the smoke, said the hobbit. It does not prove it, said Balin, though I don't doubt you are right. Might have gone away for some time. I'd be lying out on some mountainside, keeping watch. Still, I suspect smokes and steams would come out of the gates. The halls would they must be filled of his reek. With such gloomy thoughts, followed by their croaking crows above them, they made their weary way back to the camp. Only in June they had some guests in the fair house of Elrond, and through autumn was now crawling towards winter. That pleasant time it now seemed years ago. They were alone in perilous waste, without hope of further help. They were at the end of their journey, but as far as ever, it seemed from the end of the quest, none of them had much spirit left. Now, strange to say, Mr. Baggins had more than the others. He would often borrow Thorn's map and gaze upon it, pondering over the ruins and the message of the moon letters Eleanor read. It was he that made the dwarves begin the most dangerous search on the western slope for the secret door. I'm going to order Otis Birch. Need to prep tea. I feel like tea would probably help me water. Tea would probably help me just a little bit more. But we shall soon find that out. They moved their camp then to a long valley, narrower than the great dale in the south where the gates of the river stood, and walled with lower spurs of the mountain. Two of these we here thrust forward into the west from the mountain and the mass and long, steep sided ridges that fell either downwards towards the plain either downwards towards the plain. On this western side, there were fewer signs of the dragon's meandering feet. There was some grass for the ponies. The western camp shadowed all day by cliff and wall, and the sun began to sink towards the forest. Day by day, they toiled in parties, searching for the path in the mountainside. If the map was true, somewhere high above of the cliff at the valley's head must stand the secret door. Day by day, they came back to camp without success. But at last, unexpectedly, they found what they were seeking. Keely and the hobbit went back one day down the valley and scrambled among some tumbled rocks at its southern corner. About midday, creeping behind a great stone, stood alone like a pillar. Bilbo came on what looked like some rough steps going down upwards. Following these excitedly, he and the dwarves found traces of a narrow track, often lost, often rediscovered, that wandering on the top of a southern ridge and brought them at last to a still narrower ridge, which turned north against the face of the mountain. Looking down, they saw that they were at the top of a cliff at the valley's head and were gazing down on their camp below, silently clinging to the rock, while on the right they went still, single file along the ledge, till the wall opened and they turned into a little steep wall bay, grassy floor, still and quiet. It'll be fine. I just slightly chuck my phone over to the bed so that would stop buzzing. I'll leave it in the mic. That should be fine. Hopefully. Where am I? As they found and could not. be seen from far below because of the overhanging of the cliff, nor from further off because it was so small that it looked like a dark crack and no more. It was not a cave. It was open to the sky above, but it's at its inner and a flat wall rose up in the lower part. Close to the ground was as smooth and upright as a mason's work, without a joint or crevice to be seen. No sign was there of a post or litten or threshold, nor any sign of bar, bolt, or keyhole. Yet they did not doubt they found the door at last. They beat on it, they pressed and pushed on it, they implored to move it, they spoke fragments of broken spells of opening, and nothing stirred. At last, tired out, they really rested on the grass at its feet, and then evening began their long climb down. There was excitement at that camp at night. In the morning, they began to move out once more. Only Bulford and Bumper were left behind to guard the ponies, as in such stores they had brought with them in the river. The others went down the valley and up the newly found path, and so too to the narrow ledge. Along this they could carry no bundles or packs, so narrow and breathless as it was with a fall of 150 feet beside them, led into sharp rocks below. Each of them took a good coil of rope and wound tight between his waist. So, at last, without mishap, they reached the little Gaspy Bay. There they made their third camp, hauling up what they needed from below with the ropes. Down the same way, they able to occasionally lower one or more active dwarves, such as Keeley, in exchange for news, as there was, or take a share in the guard below, while Bulfer was holed up with the higher camp. Bulfer would not come up either the rope or the path. I am too fat for such fly walks, he said. I should turn dizzy and tread on my beard. Then you would be 13 again. And the knotted rope were too slender for my weight. Lucky for him, that was not true, as you will see. In the meanwhile, some of them explored the ledge beyond the opening and found a path that led higher and higher up on the mountain. But they dare not venture very far away that way, nor was there much use of it. Out up there was a silence reigned, broken of no bird or sound except the wind and stone. They spoke low and never called or song, for danger brewed in every rock. The others were busy with the secret of the door. Others who were busy with the secret of the door had no success. They were too eager to trouble about the ruins or the moon letters, but tried without resting to discover what exactly in the smooth face of the rock the door was hidden. They had brought picks and tools of many sorts from Lake Town, and at first they tried to use these, but then they stuck the stone with their the handles splintered and jarred their arms cruelly, and the steel heads broke and bent like lead. Mining work. They saw clearly there was no good against magic that shut this door, and they grew terrified too with the echoing of noise. Bilbo found sitting on the doorstep lonesome and worrisome. There wasn't a doorstep, of course, really. But they used to call the little grassy space between the wall and the opening of the doorstep in fun, remembering Bilbo's words long ago at the unexpected party in his hobbit hole, when he said they could sit on the doorstep until they thought of something. And sat and think they did, and wandered aimlessly about, and the glummer and glummer they became. Their spirits had risen a little at the discovery of the path, but now they sank into their boots, and yet they would not give up or go away. The hobbit was no longer much brighter than the dwarves. He would do nothing but sit with his back to the rock face and stare west as to the opening over the cliff, over the wide lands, to the black wall of Mirkwood, into the distance beyond, in which he sometimes thought he could catch glimpses of the misty mountains, small and far. If the dwarves asked him what he was doing, he answered, "He said sitting on the doorstep and thinking, and would be my job. Not to mention getting inside, so I am sitting and thinking." But I am afraid he was not thinking much of the job, for what lay beyond the blue distance, the quiet western land, and the hill, and his hobbit hole under it. A large gray stone in the center of the grass. He lay stared moodily as it. And he stared moodily at it, or watched with the great snails. They seemed to love the little shut-in bay and the walls of coal. And the walls of cool rock. There were so many of them of huge sizes crawling slowly and stickily to the sides. Tomorrow begins the last day of autumn, said Thor one day. And winter comes after autumn, said Boof. And next year after that, said Wayland. And our beards will grow until they hang down on the cliff to the valley before anything happens here. What is our burglar doing for us? Since he's got an invisible ring, he ought to have be specially excellent performer now. I'm beginning to think he may have gone to the front gate and spy things on a bit. Bibble heard this, and the dwarves were on the rocks just above the enclosure where he was sitting. And good gracious, he thought. So that was what they're beginning to think of, is it? It's always poor me that has to get them out of their difficulties. At least since the wizard left, whatever am I going to do? I might have known that something dreadful would happen to me in the end. I don't think I can bear to see the unhappy Valley of Dale again, as for that steaming gate. That night, he was very miserable and hardly slept. The next day, all the dwarves went off wandering in various directions. Some were exercising the ponies down below. Some were roving about the mountainside. All day, Bilbo sat gloomy in the grassy bay, gazing at the stone at our west. A stone or out west through the narrow opening. He had a queer feeling that he was waiting for something. Perhaps the wizard will suddenly come back today, he thought. If he lifted his head, he could see a glimpse of the distant forest. As the sun turned west, there was a gleam of yellow upon its far roof, as if the light had caught the last pale leaves. He then saw the orange ball of the sun seeking towards the valley of the level of his eyes. He went to the opening, and there, pale and faint, was a thin new moon above the rim of the earth. At that very moment, he heard a sharp crack behind him. There, on the gray stone in the grass, there was an enormous thrush, nearly coal black. Its pale eye, very black. Its pale yellow breast freckled with deep spots. Crack! It caught a snail. I was knocking on snow. Crack, crack. Suddenly Bilbo stood, forgetting all danger. He stood on the ledge and hailed the dwarves, shouting, wavering. Those that were nearest came tumbling over the rocks as fast as they could along the ledge to him, wondering what on earth was the matter, and the others shouted to be hauled up to the ropes, except for Umber, of course. He was asleep. Quickly, Bilbo explained, and they all fell silent. The hobbits standing by the gray stone, the dwarves were wagging their beards, waiting impatiently. The sun sank lower and lower with their hopes fell. It sank onto a belt and reddened clouds and disappears. The dwarves groaned. Still, Bilbo stood almost without moving. The little moon was dipping to the horizon. Evening was coming on. Then, suddenly, when their hope was at the lowest, of a red ray of the sun escaped, like a finger through a rent in the cloud. A gleam of light came straight through the opening into the bay of the fell on the smooth rock. The old thrush who had and the rock had been watching from a high perch with beady eyes. The head cocked to one side, giving a sudden trill. Then there was a loud crack. A flack of rock split from the wall and fell. A hole appeared suddenly about 3 feet from the ground. Quickly trembling, lest the chance should fade, the dwarves rushed to the rock, began pushing him. The key, the key! Bill was, where's Thorin? Thorin hurried up. The key that went in with the map. Try it now, while there's still time. Then Thorin stepped up and drew the key on its chain, snapped around his neck. He put it to the hole, and it fitted and turned. Snap! The gleam went out. The sun sank. The moon was gone, and the evening sprang into the sky. Now, they all pushed together, and slowly apart the rock wall gave way. Long, straight cracks appeared and widened. A door 5 feet and 3 broad was outlined, and slowly, without a sound, swung inwards. Swung inwards. It seemed as if darkness flowed out like a vapor from the hole in the mountainside. Deep darkness in which nothing could be seen lay before their eyes, a yawning mouth down. All right. Let's call that for today. Still, 4 chapters is better than nothing if I do say so myself. Let us see. Ooh. The way after. What do I want to go on? I have not rated her in a while. Who else is there on? Yeah, I have not rated her in a while. Yeah, I haven't rated her in a while. We're gonna go after that person as soon as it loads on my other screen. I miss my baby. Turn that up just a little bit. No, I'll just type it in because I can. /raid baby cute. Yeah, that went in perfect. Although, which is being stupid and not loading it correctly. It doesn't matter. In any case, tomorrow we're going to do another build stream. It's going to be very fun. I think we're probably going to enjoy this a little bit this build a little bit more than I did the last one. I think mostly because I have more experience building Gundam models than I did like Flame Toy Transformer models, so it'll be very interesting that. As for, I don't know what next week's going to bring. I know for certain we might be like, depending on how much we get done with the chapters, we might be finishing The Hobbit next week. We are almost near the end. And yeah, we'll go from there. So thank you all for sticking around, and let's go give Viv some love.